So we start item 6 of the agenda with the report from the Committee on Managerial and Financial Accountability. Nick Pacheco has done such a truly terrific job of chairing this committee. I'll turn it to Nick, and at the risk of embarrassing him, I'll also wish him happy birthday.
Thank you. Okay, tonight we're going to start by going over the report that we generated after meeting and the 5 issues that we've identified. One of the first things I want to clarify is what our role is and exactly what we're doing with this charter. Because one of the things that I've encountered in meeting in my own district is that some of the residents have ideas about how the city can be better run in terms of management or the sort of departmental level suggestions. And I want to clarify some of that in terms of how our report is not going down to that level, but is actually dealing with authority, responsibility, and accountability. So the first thing is I want to show one chart because I want to illustrate this point. I don't know if you have this, but the commissioners should all have this chart in their handout. One of the issues we're going to be talking about tonight is what has been identified as the accounting versus the auditing. This debate has gotten kind of convoluted because sometimes different individuals have different meanings for the words accounting, auditing, pre-audit, post-audit. And so what I've done is I try to define the issue in a way that's manageable for not only the commissioners, but for everyone who's here tonight. So if you look up at the wall, and if the commissioners, we have a handout for everyone, what I want to point out to everyone is, and this is something that Commissioner Dennis Zine had adamantly felt that we should identify. When you look at taxpayer money, because what we're talking about is we're talking about your money. I mean, basically, when we talk about finance and management, we're talking about your money. And it's critical that when we're talking about taxpayer money, that it be handled appropriately and there be checks and balances in the process. So what I've pointed out here is at the left-hand side, you have a request for taxpayer money, and I call that in. And what I call it in, I mean is that that money is still within the city. Now, through the departments, now many people will request money. We have contracted individuals, we have departments, we have grantees through the grant programs that we've applied to. So many of these people will ask for money to be paid out. The department will have a process, the controller's office will have a process. At the end of that process, I'm looking at, has that money been authorized for payment? Is the taxpayer's money now out? Is it going out? What you will find out from the report at a later point, but I'm using this as an example, is that the committee members, myself, Commissioner Chemerinsky, and Commissioner Zine, all through consensus decided that the controller should be responsible for that the controller should have the final approval on the process. Now, what I want to make clear to you is that's a charter issue in terms of, see where it says controller's approval? That's the charter issue. The non-charter issue is when you get down to the department's process and the controller's process, the charter is not going to micromanage that. That is something where we rely on our professionals, our elected officials to set the parameters and set the controls. However many hoops or whatever you want to call them that the controller is going to make those individuals go through before he signs that check, that is not a charter issue. That is something that's delegated, and that's why we hold him accountable. In this case, I say him because it's Rick Tuttle. So that is what we're talking about. It's important to understand that because it kind of sets the framework of how we're dealing with the charter. In our issue, we've identified that upper portion as accounting, front end, pre-audit. I just use the layman's term of spending the money, the spending process. Once you look down here, we have an issue that will come up later, which is called the verification of that, the independent monitoring, the auditing, the back end, the post-audit. We'll get to that later on, but I really wanted to set the parameters so that you understood what we're talking about in terms of how we viewed our task. The committee also looked at, and we'll be looking at, this is a committee that's going to look at contracting, purchasing, how the city is managing the treasury and other issues. So for tonight, let's look at the 5 issues that we have identified. The 5 issues that we've identified is, should the accounting and auditing be segregated or contained within the controller's office as it is now? The second issue is, should there be a controller auditor appointed or elected? The third issue is, should there be a Department of Finance, and if so, where should it be in terms of the controller, the mayor, and the council? The fourth issue is, should there be a city budget office separate apart? And then the last issue is, should there be a city administrative officer? Through our report and recommendations, I will point out to the commissioners that there has been some consensus on issues. I want to bring these up front so that you at least get those out of the way. On issue which is letter C, whether or not a Department of Finance should be created, there has been consensus among the committee members that there should be a Department of Finance, and it should be under the direction of the mayor's office. And the analysis and presentation as to the reasoning for that is within the report, but basically it's viewed that the administrative functions should be left with the executive branch of the government, and that's how we saw it in terms of that one issue. The other consensus, which is it's not a reform as it's been identified to me earlier today, but the other consensus is we will still maintain an elected finance officer. And currently the consensus is that the elected finance officer will do what I've identified as the controller's approval process up there, the spending process. So those are the 2 areas where we have reached a consensus. There's no consensus right now in terms of, I'm sorry, there is one other consensus. It appears that there's also a consensus that the accounting, what we think of in terms of the commissioners, the accounting should be separated from the auditing. Okay. And that's what we're pointing to up here. Now, as you go through the report, let's look at this one issue at a time. The accounting and auditing, you have choices. Choice 1 on page 6 is leave it the same or separate. I already told you what the committee came up with on that issue. On page 8, you have the question of the controller auditor, appointed or elected. I already mentioned that we're going with an elected. Page 11 deals with the Department of Finance. We agree that there should be a Department of Finance with the task articulated there. I put out a sort of cheat sheet of all the tasks that are involved in a finance department or financing of a city. It's 2 pages. It basically looks like a grid. It has California cities and their finance officers. It was available at the table if you didn't get it, but it basically looks like this. It's a grid, and page 2 has all the tasks. In those tasks, we identified that the finance department should be responsible for revenue collection, delinquent revenue collection and receivables, cash and investment management, fixed asset management and inventory, debt issuance and management, and grant management. And this is the person that would be appointed by the mayor, approved by the council, serving at the discretion of the mayor. D, the city budget office. You have 2 options here that have been presented. The first option is to create a budget office under the CAO and assign it the following functions: budget preparation, revenue projection, financial forecasting, program evaluation, budget and policy analysis, and analysis of intergovernmental financial policies. And what that means is that they're going to provide the city with information regarding how, if the state acts in a manner that's going to fiscally impact us, if the county acts in a manner that's going to fiscally impact us, you would get that information in the budget office. That's option A. Option 1, I'm sorry. Option 2 is to create a budget office in the mayor's office and a budget office in the council office. This would mirror the federal government, and the functions being divided as I believe Commissioner Chemerinsky has given you in his memo. The last issue, which is the city administrative officer, as is pointed out in the report, unbeknownst to us, we were limited in our time at our last meeting with the Department of Water, at the Department of Water and Power, because there was pesticide and spraying going on. So originally we had a consensus, and then on that meeting, Commissioner Chemerinsky had changed his position. We don't have a consensus on that issue. What I do want to present, though, so you understand and look at, is the present structure. When you look at the present structure, you will see that the mayor does the budget preparation and submittal. It gets adopted by the council. The CAO office is assisting the budget preparation through the forecast and the policy analysis, or the financial analysis. Assists the mayor. The controller handles the pre-audit, post-audit, and revenue projection. The city clerk and treasurer handle the revenue collection, permits, taxes, etc. It's cash management and investments. Now, later on, or in a few minutes, let me give you the proposal or the changes that I have put together as part of the plan. Under my recommendations to you as commissioners, the controller would do the accounting. The mayor would still do the budget presentation, and the council will still do the adoption. However, under the CAO, I've identified a budget office. This is something that's in your report that was modeled after the city of New York. One of the things I want to point out about this issue, as in the report, was that the main mission of the budget office was to open up the process and make it more democratic. That is sort of where we're coming from. The budget preparation, the revenue projection, the financial forecasting, and the public information regarding the budget programs, the budget and program evaluation. The main thrust of that position or development is that, as you all know, as is pointed out in the prior structure, the CAO is currently administering this process and feeding the mayor the information. As you know, the CAO reports or is accountable to both the mayor and the council. One of the issues that's been identified, and I'm going to try to do this as respectfully as possible, one of the issues that's been identified about the CAO is that it's a misnomer in the sense that the city administrative officer, because the CAO does not run the outside departments outside of his own. What he has presented in his first presentation and meeting with us is that it's his job to provide the information, the analysis, the background, the research for the mayor's office, and really get the nuts and bolts put together for that budget preparation. And what I have told other commissioners and told people in the public is, what I see the CAO as being is he is basically, and I say he because it's Keith Comrie at this point, he is basically our reference librarian, our internet, whatever you want to call him, but he's the person we go to for the information. So what I want to do is I want to have that budget office pulled out so that when a citizen from any part of the city has a question, they don't have to be an insider to know that the budget preparation comes out of the CAO's office. That's something that's not intuitive to the average citizen. So the idea is to have a centralized area where you can have a budget information if you have a question. For example, the debate about how much you put in and how much you get out. that would be something that we would have centralized so that people can get that information. The auditor, which we will get back to in terms of this issue, can we go back to the chart that was called the spending process? While we were discussing this issue, I will, can you raise it a little higher? Or while we were discussing this issue, I will confess to you that there was a lot of confusion as to exactly what we were talking about, because like I said earlier, some people had one understanding of the terms and people had other understandings of the terms we were using. What I've been able to synthesize, and I would like Commissioner Chemerinsky and Commissioner Zine to correct me if necessary, is that what they and what we have come up with in terms of our desired goal is that when taxpayer money is being spent, and I know I'm repeating myself, but when taxpayer money is being spent, we would like the controller's office to not sign off on that money being spent until they feel satisfied that it's an appropriate expenditure, that's not illegal, that's not being fraudulently done, that's not something that's outside the approved budget, that once the budget's adopted. Further along this process, we would like verification. In other words, auditing, back-end, post-audit. We would like someone to independently monitor that complete transaction. Now, there's information out there, and information that we received, that this is being done on an annual basis by the independent auditors. This may be something that will require further discussion, but the one consensus we reached is that the front end, the top, should be definitely separated from the back end. So I call it spending process versus verification of the spending process. Commissioner Zine, have I covered that?
Very on target.
On target, okay. And this is something that the controller will talk to us about and give us an update or give us some information as to how we can accomplish this goal in terms of being in the charter. Now, moving on to Commissioner Chemerinsky also put out some suggestions on how we should approach this area. And I'm sure you received them or saw them out there. So we try to put a chart together for the commissioners so that you can see this. I know it's hard to read because I'm having a hard time from this distance. Basically, under that model, there would be a controller doing the pre-audit. Now, remember, when we say pre-audit, we're talking about the spending process, which I've already identified in the earlier chart. We have the mayor and the council. We have an auditor who's appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the council. The only deviation or difference between the earlier chart that I presented and the chart that Chemerinsky is presenting, Commissioner Chemerinsky, is the term, 6-year versus 10 years. Okay. We both agree that it can be appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the council. In Chemerinsky's model, the mayor would have his own budget office, just like the president of the United States has their own budget office. And the council would have their own budget office, just like the Congress has their own budget office. Under the finance officer, Chairman Chemerinsky felt that not only would we articulate the duties that the finance officer would be responsible for, but he felt it was necessary that we identify departments to deal with these tasks: Department of Revenue Collection, Department of Revenue Management, Department of Debt Management, and Department of Grants Management. It's basically a infrastructure for the task. So those are the charts and a basic synopsis of the report you received. If there's any questions from the commissioners at this time as to what we've put up there. Well, unfortunately, we're limited by our technology. I don't think we can blow them up.
I think
that we have hard copies.
I think at this point
we have hard copies available.
We do have hard copies, and we'll make them available. What I want to do now, thank you so much. I want to always, after a chair's done a report, just ask if any of the other members of this committee have any comments. Dennis, is there anything you wish to add?
I'd just like to add that it's a concise report.
a lot of diligence put into it, and the concern that we have as commissioners from this commission is that the taxpayers' dollars be protected and be spent wisely, and there be no misappropriation anywhere through the system. That was our greatest concern. And the comments that have been stated earlier in the Daily News article about the indebtedness of the city is frightening to me, and I'm sure most of you. We want to make sure that doesn't stay in place. There's some changes in that. But your dollar is our greatest concern, and this financial report reflects that. I want to also, with my fellow commissioners and those of you, Nick, on his birthday, is dedicating it tonight to this commission meeting, as we do every Monday evening. And we'd like to sing him happy birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Nick. Happy birthday to you. Thank you. There's not much fun on this, but sometimes we have some fun, so.
If I only had a knife
Thank
for
you.
the charter. Do we have those?
I'm the other member of this committee, so as to save time, I circulated my comments in writing to everyone. There are copies available outside and here, and Nick did an accurate job of reflecting my views. So I think what I will do now is shift to the sub-B part of this item on the agenda, where we've asked some key city officials to share with us their views of the budget process before we begin discussing. And before I begin calling them up, I want to recognize one other person in the audience who I didn't recognize before. Appointed Charter Commissioner Sharon Schuster is here, and we should recognize her presence as well. My comments were the ones that were faxed on Friday, and I have additional copies here. But let me ask, we've asked if there's a representative from the mayor's office who would like to speak with us about the budget process. We've also asked a representative from the controller's office and the CIO office, and also Bill Powers will hear from here. I apologize that we'll have to limit these comments to just 10 minutes simply because of the press of the agenda. Do we have a representative from the mayor's office here this evening? Teresa Patsakis?
Good evening.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. And thank you for inviting the mayor's input on this important topic. He's sorry that because of demands in his schedule that he couldn't be here tonight, but he very much enjoyed addressing you at the October meeting, and he hopes to do so again in the very near future. I have, hopefully you've all received a copy of this one-pager, and there's copies available for the public as well, but it's very straightforward. The mayor has three simple, the mayor has three simple recommendations when it comes to the city's financial management. And I'm going to take them a little bit out of order. First, the mayor recommends that the charter assign budget responsibility to the mayor. This is how the current charter exists and what he believes the future charter should do as well. And along with that, any department or office that's given responsibility for the budget should report to the mayor and be accountable to the mayor. There should not be a city department that has budget responsibility that also has a dual reporting relationship to the mayor and the city council. Secondly, the mayor recommends that the financial functions of the city be consolidated into one city department. He would propose a city finance department. These would be functions that are currently performed in the city treasurer's office, certain tax collecting and revenue collecting in the city clerk's office, what's performed by the CAO, and the pre-audit accounting function that's performed by the city controller. These handling, and that brings me to the last recommendation, which is that there should be an elected city auditor. Right now we have a controller who performs both the pre-audit and accounting function and also the post-audit function. The mayor is recommending that those two functions, on one hand the pre-audit and accounting, be performed in the executive branch separate and away from the accounting that would be performed by elected auditor. And this is because he feels it's an important check and balance, and it's consistent with best practices in the finance world. He'd also like you to keep in mind just a few overriding principles, because you're considering a myriad of options tonight, and those would be that the charter should not be overly detailed, and that it's important to provide future leaders with a flexible framework. So while it may make sense today to organize a city department one way, the mayor would say instead just assign functions to a department, because what works today may not work in the future, and you don't want to have to put charter revisions to the public or to the voters just to reorganize a city department. Secondly, he would say that the city's financial structure should promote accountability and the appropriate checks and balances. And this again would mean that there should be no dual reporting relationships, and that if the mayor is going to be accountable for implementing and executing the city's budget, that he needs to be given the proper authority, resources, and tools to do just that. Finally, on the flip side, is the mayor's response to options that you're considering tonight that were raised in the report that Commissioner Pacheco raised. They're pretty self-explanatory, and you can just read through them, and to a large extent they just echo what the mayor's recommendations have been. So I'm available for questions if you have any.
Thank you. Bill?
I do have one question. Thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
I was wondering if the mayor has any, or the mayor's office has any position on the type of level of detail that would be in the charter under the proposal by the chair of the commission, so that it would include what department should be included in the finance department.
Again, he recommends that functions be outlined, but not necessarily which division. So if I remember correctly, there was like the city finance department had 4 different sections. No, he would say that that level of detail. To give you an example, recently a general manager was hired by the city. After a few months, they took a look at the organization and they reorganized it. They eliminated divisions, merged others. A lot of it was because of changing technology allowed him to do that, and that's a healthy thing for any organization to periodically go through. And the mayor would say that that's a framework. You should leave that framework and that ability to future leaders.
Thank you. Bennett, then Gloria.
I have a couple of questions here. Regarding the handout here that talks about the options the mayor supports, firstly, the first 2 items here on creating a city finance department under the executive branch and creating a budget office in the mayor's office, is there anything in the charter now that keeps the mayor from having those functions or setting those up within his office?
Yes. Right now, all the finance functions aren't performed by the executive branch. The CAO is sort of borders on the executive branch and the legislative branch because they have this dual reporting relationship. They're sort of a different animal. The treasurer's office is in the executive branch. The city clerk's is. Again, the controller function, pre-audit, what have you, is not. So so his recommendation is that we take these functions and put them all in the executive branch. And he doesn't have the ability right now to take responsibilities from an elected office because it is set forth in the charter, as well as the CAO's responsibilities.
And my second question, the third part of those options that mayor supports, where it says that the pre-audit then, I guess, would go from the controller to the executive branch. And in the current charter, the controller is in the controller's own department. The controller is pre-audited by the mayor. Who would pre-audit, or who would look over the mayor's office to make sure that all of the expenditures were correct in this model?
Well, again, he's recommending that there be an elected city auditor, and that
But only to do post-audit functions, it says here, and that the pre-audit would be in the
Right.
executive branch.
It's actually,
So
right.
who would do that for the mayor?
Well, like any other city department, there would be checks and balances on the front end where the council approves the budget and specific purposes, and then where the mayor, let me, hold on a second. And then on the back end, that an auditor then can go through the books and check them. Now, it's a misconception that auditors are after the fact. In today's day and age, auditors actually can simultaneously audit books if they have the right technologies, and many cities have this, so that where you have an auditor who sits at a terminal and actually can watch transactions as they occur. And I agree with you that there would be sort of a special process for perhaps the mayor's office, but the mayor isn't proposing that the pre-audit be specifically in his office. He's proposing that that it be a city finance officer. For instance, like let's just take our existing CAO's office, that administrator would be reporting to the mayor, but it would take place in a separate office, that you would have all the proper signatures. So when the city finance officer, just as they sign off on other general manager requisitions and requests for payment from animal services or from the, any given city department, that all those signatures also be present from the mayor's office, and then all those, everything be reported and subject to check.
Wouldn't that officer, and pardon me if I seem to be exceeding, I just would like to clarify this, Mr. Chair, but wouldn't that officer be someone appointed by the mayor or hired by the mayor?
Yes, and
who would be looking to see if the mayor
yes, and if
would
that is,
would that have been the same, for example, with well, there was an issue with, on a previous mayor, was this thing Far East Bank or things like that.
I don't know too much about that,
pre-audit.
but I would say that if that is an issue for the commission, if the commission is concerned about expenditures by the mayor's office and they want to set up a special way for mayor's office expenditures to be done, then that's perfectly appropriate and we have no objection. We're just saying as a whole we'd like to see a consolidation so that there's a better integration and working together of the financial arm of the city.
Gloria, and then I think we should move on. Thank you, Bennett. Gloria, and then we should move on to the next speaker.
Yeah, mine's just a quick question. On the other proposals, we have a flow chart. Do you have something where you've graphed this onto a flow chart, or if not, can staff go ahead and consolidate the proposal onto a chart so we can lay them out simultaneously? I don't know if you have.
I don't have one, but we can get you one.
Okay, thanks. That would be helpful.
Great, thank you so
Anything else?
much.
Sure, thank you very much.
We've also asked a representative from the Controller's Office to be here. I know that Rick Tuttle said that he had a conflict because of a long-standing pre-existing commitment, but I see that Tim Lynch is here. If you could just introduce yourself for the tape.
Hi, I'm Tim Lynch. I'm Deputy City Controller. Also here in the front row is Tony Miera, who's the Chief Deputy Controller, position he held under 4 different controllers. The reason Rick Tuttle isn't here is he's at this moment giving the keynote speech to the Constitutional Rights Foundation. The topic, believe it or not, is charter reform. And he had accepted that before this meeting was scheduled, or he would be here. He's going to try to get here. If you go to 10 o'clock, you'll probably see him. The committee has worked very hard, and our office has been answering very aggressive questions. They've done the job that I think the voters asked them to do, which is really examine this charter. I believe the consensus report that you heard earlier, there are some areas of non-consensus, is an example of what happens when you get into an issue at depth and how things evolve. And that process, I think, will continue, and I think you can see this is a pretty complicated issue. Part of the complication comes from how things can easily get oversimplified or misleading, and I'll just use the example of the debt story that the chairman in the beginning announced there was no report by this commission on debt, Yet that was what the newspaper reported. And one of the things that an editorial in the same paper said is that there's no one place where that information exists. Yet when the reporter had called our office saying, is it true that you have more than $10 billion of debt, we said, no, actually it's more like $14 billion, which is what the story reported, and we provided the document, which you can get from the Comptroller's office, which is our combined annual financial statement. And that's the source document for that, the charts and everything in that story. You wouldn't get that from the story, but it's exactly where it came from. The need for a debt policy and a need for a more aggressive oversight on debt is one of those things that the city controller has called for. We've urged this commission and the appointed commission to address. We urged the city council when it set up an ad hoc committee on this before it decided how it would proceed it to address the same issue. So it's an important issue, but as you can see, it gets twisted when it gets in the papers. And it's not lack of understanding, but there are disagreements on how to proceed. And I think it's important for the audience, anyone who watches the tape of this, and as this process unfolds, understand that sometimes the simple initial reaction is not what is the way it ought to really work. There is a prepared statement which I put outside late, so those of you who sat down early didn't get, but there's still some out there. I have some extras, and I think the commissioners have it. I'll try to go through it quickly, and before I start, I'm not, with the time limit, I won't be able to get through it all. It's something that Rick wanted to say. But so let me first just make a broad point. There are 3 citywide elected officials that are accountable to the people for the whole city of Los Angeles: the city controller, the mayor, and the city attorney. The city controller is directly accountable to the public and no one else for maintaining the duties of that office, which is to maintain the integrity of the books and to make sure that the public funds are spent in accordance with law. The controller does not make policy. We do not make the law. That's done by the mayor and council. We're the honest brokers. We're the umpires. We're one of the smallest offices in the city. There's about 160 staff in a city with 50,000 employees. That's a pretty small staff to be the honest broker. There are many more accounting employees, many more officials throughout the city that are involved with the financial records. Every department maintains its own records. We are just the backstop. We're the last place that rules on whether or not it's in accordance with the playing field, that, you know, all the rules that everyone has agreed, been signed to law, gone through the mayor's proposal, council's amendments, and the veto. That's the role the controller plays. In the audit function, what the controller does, it picks and chooses. Again, it's a very small staff, only around 20 auditors. And it picks and chooses where to go in and look to see if the internal controls are in place. That means to see whether the system has broken down inside a department so that you can no longer count on the information coming forward. Then you recommend remedies, and you see those reports in the paper from time to time. That's a managerial executive function to change that. It requires the mayor and the department heads to act on it. The controller has no power to make those changes, can only identify the deficiencies. Therefore, to argue that there's some sort of conflict between these roles is really not the case. The controller is, as this independent watchdog, this independent auditor, a chief accountant for the city of Los Angeles, in a position of adhering to the rules irregardless of how one would have liked it to have come out. For example, if you say, we're going to accomplish the following this year, we're going to pave X number of miles in the streets, and it doesn't happen, the controller has no vested interest in that, whether it did or didn't. We'll tell the truth. Let the chips fall where they may. We don't know whether the campaign promise got broke or whether the department is bloated. That has to be more for the detail. But the data will be honestly presented by our office. And that's the role we play. We don't approve any checks that are for our own function. And let me just go, it wasn't said here tonight, but it's been said in some of the written material that people here may have seen, so I want to go into this. I'll just read this paragraph. In no instance is the controller reviewing his or her contracts and his or her own employees. This means that in a city with nearly 50,000 employees, the controller does not audit the work of about 160 persons who work for the controller. Expenditures of those employees and the controller's budget are reviewed by the mayor's office under Charter Section 367. This is one of those checks and balances put in by the founding fathers in 1925 in the city of Los Angeles. They got it right. The controller couldn't approve its own records, its own books. They set the mayor up to be the controller for the controller. The only department the mayor reviews instead of the controller. In addition, the official accounting records of the city, which are maintained by the controller, not maintained by the mayor, which might not like the way it comes out. And we've had that of mayors that have that capability in other cities in the United States. And if anyone wants citations, call us at our office. We'll dig some out for you. Those records, however, are certified, reviewed by an outside CPA firm selected under Section 378 of the city charter. Again, this was a later amendment. This came in around 1942. But the city council got the voters to approve a charter amendment saying that the controller's books would be audited by an outside CPA firm. In small cities, in city manager forms of government, that's about the only auditing that goes on, is they have outside firms.
Could I ask you to take about a minute and finish up?
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Sure. I would also like this to note, for those who are interested in these things, about the quality of this document, besides being what is required by law, also we've given to a peer group, the Government Officers Finance Association, for their review. And it has received a Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting, which is the highest certificate it can receive. And we have no fear of review of the quality of the work of the Controller's Office and have willingly subjected that. In addition, our auditors subject themselves to a peer review by an outside CPA firm to make sure they're in accordance with generally accepted auditing standards. The auditing and controller functions in the Controller's Office are under two administrative heads. Everyone except two people, Tony Mayer and myself, are civil service in the Controller's Office. The other employees are civil service. It's a professional operation. And it is, in fact, the model that people are talking about here, which is have an independent auditor, independent accounting functions, the pre-audit, post-audit functions. But the difference between the proposal that was here and what we recommend is that the appointing authority be the elected official elected by all the voters, who's the controller, not the mayor. That's considered the best check and balance, and if you check the profession, you'll find out that's widely accepted.
Thank you so much. I know there are some questions from commissioners for you, Commissioner Boland.
I guess I've got to ask the question because people in district are asking me, if it's working, if the controller in the budget department's working, then why didn't we know about DWP loud and clear in the newspapers, on the TV 3 years ago when they knew it in Sacramento? And number two, how can we have such a debt that was just in the newspapers this week? Why hasn't the people of the city been told? And why didn't we try to do something to put a stop to it a long time ago? I've got to ask that question, if this system is working, because they've been asking me.
Well, I pulled from our files today in response to the Daily News editorial 5 stories that have appeared in the last 3 or 4 years that they reported on different controller reports. We've had a succession of reports identifying these very dead issues, and they generally appear about page 5 of the Daily News, and they're a one-day story. In each and every case, we had an action item that went to the mayor and council, and it got filed with the mayor and council. They're the policymakers, which is establish a debt policy in the city of Los Angeles. We don't have one, and that's why we've kept growing. They don't want a debt policy that might limit their options. It's grown mostly in the 90s.
But if the controller's office is separate, distinct, and someone, be it the council or whoever in the newspapers trying to cover it over, should the controller's office, budget office, now in the future not do something to make the people aware of the problems? Okay, they hid it under the table, so we'll go along with it. I guess is my question. the people of the city are saying, we have to be informed, we have to know what's happening so we can voice disapproval. DWP was obvious in Sacramento 3 years ago, and it took 1997 for it finally hit to the front pages of the paper.
And that's the point. You heard it in hearings. We reported on it in our financial statements at the time. It was reported in reports to the mayor and council.
But the people don't read the financial statements. How do we get that information to the citizens so they can say, stop, enough's enough, do something about it?
You're correct. And I'm not sure that you asked the city controller how one does public relations. Maybe you should, but we don't have a public relations budget. And maybe that's, being one of the smallest departments, maybe that's a deficiency, but we don't have one.
I have Rob and Woody and Bill with questions, and Nick.
Tim, there are those of us on the commission that have worked with Rick Tuttle before, and your staff, and we find that you folks are extremely hardworking, and I hope you take Paula's question and the others that you're going to hear, and certainly the input from people that you're going to hear as we go to every council district, not personally but structurally, because as Paula said, if the system was working fine, financially, I don't think we would be up here today having been elected by the people. You don't need a public relations budget to hold a press conference and, as an independent elected official, tell the people of the city of Los Angeles what the state of affairs are. Ira Reiner has done that when he was controller. Rick has done that when he has gotten things before him that he felt were newsworthy. My question to you is, we're not the first charter commission in the last 70 years to take a look at these types of proposals. Most of the commissions that have looked at this issue, and the most recent one was 30 years ago, have recommended that the pre-audit be separated from the accounting at the back end. And I'm just wondering if you have the check and balance on the front end to make sure that the money is being spent properly, otherwise you don't issue the check. Are all of the resources that we're hearing from over the past 70 years, people in academics, and financial officers, are they all wrong when they come to the conclusion that these two functions should be separate?
When I first started working for the controller, I pulled the old Reining and Little Hoover Commission reports, and I dusted them off when this got going. And there's several experts here, staff, that I've talked about these things with. The Little Hoover Commission is a good example. In 1951, they had a report recommended abolishing an elected city attorney and elected city controller, and turning these into fixed-term appointed offices, and also creating a CAO. That went on the ballot, that passed, it became law. Their final report, I probably have it in my briefcase, but I won't dig far. Their final report changed their mind. After 2 years of continued study, they decided that the present system should be continued. It gets cited that they had a recommendation. Never referenced is their final report. They changed their mind. It should stay the same because it works, and I don't know what changed their mind. I couldn't find any documentation of that, but I'm just telling you, that report changed. The Reining Commission, again, that was appointed by the mayor. It's no surprise that mayors want more executive authority with less oversight. Nobody likes anyone looking over their shoulder. So a mayor-appointed commission is clearly going to make that recommendation. The council, which is not a friend of the city controller or many of the things we do, as you know, they dropped that proposal to not have an elected controller. But it didn't drop forever. That was done by a commission that was a special committee headed by Ed Edelman. So it went to the ballot without the controller function being eliminated. 1977, that issue alone was on the ballot in the city of Los Angeles. 76% of the voters said no.
Which issue are you talking about?
Whether the controller should be appointed or elected, and to split the functions. That was on the ballot in 1977. 76% of the voters said no. Look it up. And 24% said yes. And that was with the mayor at the time, no, not the mayor, I'm sorry, the CAO at the time, the head of the city council, a whole host of elected officials were on one side, and it's a handful of people on the other side. But it went overwhelmingly down. On the East Coast, the same thing happened in New York City, and it's in a prepared statement. I put a little history there. They put it on the ballot in New York after the New York debt crisis, And the voters turned it down. Instead, they strengthened both the office of the mayor and the office of the controller. Big cities need different solutions than city manager forms of government, and that's one of those points we have in our prepared statement.
Thank you. Woody?
I just want to know, does the charter as it presents itself now gives you the authority to be a strong watchdog in terms of the budget?
The charter has sufficient authority. There are areas where people will argue with us, and we obviously do not have adequate budget for some of the activities. We solve that in some cases by asking for the departments that we're auditing, which is a very awkward circumstance, you can imagine, to give us the money to investigate them so we can tell them how to improve their work. They hate doing it, but with the mayor and council support, we've been able to do that on occasion. We hire outside firms, they work with our staff, and we do some very good reports. We usually have the mayor and the CLA and the CAO helping us on those. They tend to be joint projects, and we did that with DWP about 5 years ago in a very major way. We've done that with some other city departments.
You don't have the independence to do that yourself within?
We don't have independence to fund ourselves. And with our existing staff, we do target, and we have, authority is there, and this may not be a charter issue. It's very hard to guarantee funding for investigations that people would rather not have.
Thank you. Bill, and then Nick, and then we should move on to the next speaker.
I've got two questions, and I want to go back to the debt problem and the way it's grown and the perception that it wasn't known till recently. And one of the things you said in response to Commissioner Boland's question was, that the controller has suggested changes in the debt policy to both the mayor and the...
You don't have one.
You
don't have one.
To establish one. But to the mayor and city council, but the controller is not the policy-making body, so it itself can't do anything.
You could change the charter on that. We didn't make a recommendation here, but we have had some discussions with individual commissioners.
My question is, isn't that... It seems to me that's the very problem with the charter that we're all here to talk about, that things are spread over so many different places that you can't point the finger at one department and say, you're responsible for this. The debt has grown this large. Why isn't there a policy? Now, if the accounting function were in the mayor's office, and so that the mayor had some, or the executive branch had some responsibility there, couldn't we then say the buck stops there, and wouldn't that encourage the mayor's office then to do something about a debt policy, to push for change?
I don't think any mayor would tell you they don't know what's going on in debt policy. It's most of the debts, for example, has been incurred by commissioners that have been appointed by the mayor, the CRA and the Department of Water and Power in particular. The mayors take great care at appointing those people, and they have close liaison on that. And debt issued by those organizations is done pursuant to contracts that the mayor approves by executive order.
So, but my question is, if the mayor's, if the executive branch had responsibility for the accounting function, for the pre-audit function, wouldn't it? And so the buck stopped there. Wouldn't there be more encouragement for the mayor's office to change the debt policy or to establish a debt policy?
Accounting isn't the problem on debt. The question is whether or not, just because we can sell the bonds, should we? That's the policy decision that has to be addressed.
Okay, and one other question is, in New York City, when the controller's office was strengthened, did it have both the accounting and audit function combined?
Absolutely. In fact, it has powers that I think would be cumbersome in, say, Los Angeles. No contract is approved that isn't signed off by the city controller. The controller basically does an analysis of the budget, does a shadow budget analysis, prepares a report to the city council after the mayor presents it. That's what the CAO, well, I guess the CAO doesn't really. That's what the CLA's office does today. And when there's proposal of 2 budget committees, you would have that. And in the city of New York, that would be the controller's office.
Thank you. Nick?
Tim, did you have a chance to see the chart that I presented at the beginning of my committee presentation?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I think we're having problems in terms of we're talking at different levels in terms of understanding what we're talking about, because you've identified, and I've gotten some information from your office, that auditing is what you said earlier about going into the departments and making sure that the systems in place are still working, and if there's a problem, you would make a recommendation to the mayor and the department. Did I hear you right?
That's correct.
Okay. For the sake of my question, will you agree with me, or at least see it my way, that I don't consider that auditing in my mind, and what I consider that is that's just an extension of your role as in the accounting aspect. In other words, more of a monitoring of, because if I understand correctly, you're delegate the responsibility to set those systems in place so that the money's being spent appropriately. So you're just checking systems that you recommend, and I've seen how you hand out a manual to the departments on these are the current accounting practices we would like you to follow, or we anticipate you'll be following. So I don't consider that auditing, but looking at my chart where I call the verification and the independent monitoring of that complete expenditure, am I correct in that that's only being done once a year through the annual audit?
The annual audit is the entire financial reporting system of the city, which is computerized. By the way, one of the things that someone says we ought to have this stuff done computerized, I think you did, and some offices, this stuff is reviewed by computer. Well, that's what we do. That is what our office does, and we'd like to have it more online than it is today, and we're getting there, but it takes a while to modernize the city. By the way, that's one of the areas the debt has gone to, is buying these computers.
Okay, let me ask you this. Let me just be more clear then. If you're completely responsible, for example, and I've used this example with other individuals, if a department wants to buy a $1,500 computer, I want your office to be ultimately responsible for signing that money out in terms of whatever process you pick is appropriate, because that's what we rely on your office for. But that complete process, which I've identified as the spending process, I want someone else to verify it. In other words, I want someone else to say, occasionally, not saying every day, but like occasionally to say, yes, a computer was purchased, there wasn't no corruption between the department and the controller's office, no one was stealing money, everything's okay. I want someone to do that. Is that something that I can get in this charter with your office support, is get someone that's going to do that? Not your own office, because you're approving that check, or that?
Well, Jim Armstrong, our Director of Auditing, who came to us from the federal government Inspector General Office, is here in the back. He's civil service, but he does this. And they set up their own audit plans. I do think, Nick, some of what you're saying is terminology or semantic issues. This is sort of the Bible of government accountants. This is the government accounting, auditing, and financial reporting guidelines that comes from the GFOA. You notice it has all three: accounting, auditing, financial reporting. They're a continuum. They're all part of the same rule. There's all kinds of auditing, and I think we bore the audience with this, or I would have Jim come up and talk about all the differences. But that's one of the things you test for, to make sure that you're talking about an inventory system. Make sure the inventory system's in place. We actually found there wasn't one on computers, and that was one of our audits that the auditing group put out, I think, 2 years ago.
Okay, then that makes me uncomfortable if the left hand is spending the money through the processes implemented and recommended by the controller's office. I'm sorry, I'm raising my right hand, I'm going to confuse you. Okay. So the left hand, okay, is recommending these processes, and then the right hand, still within the controller's office, is occasionally auditing the left hand. I mean, that seems to be...
The controller part of it, in the counties, they're all auditor controllers. And the controller part makes sure that there's money in the budget, and the person allowed to purchase that is signing it, and there's a contract in place. And then they go ahead and they purchase it. The auditing people go in and make sure later on that they actually know where they all are. There's an inventory system. That's a whole different function.
Yeah, but can I finish this real quick, though? Let me just make this one point. Okay, but you're asking one employee from your department to basically catch another employee from your department if there's a mistake, or if there's some fraud, or there's some embezzlement or illegal activity, and I'm uncomfortable with that.
Never. That doesn't happen. They never audit our department.
I'm not talking about
that isn't the case.
Okay.
Thank you. Gloria, you got a quick question.
Yeah, I have a quick question. I'm interested in the flow charts again. At the conclusion then, is it your premise, is it Rick Tuttle's premise that the present structure is what we should maintain, that there really is not a structural change that we should recommend in charter reform that will enhance the accountability or the efficiency of the controller's office, or basically the taxpayer's dollar? So are you basically saying keep the present structure, don't make any change?
We actually think that in the instance where you might elect a controller that doesn't have the kind of professional standards that Rick Tuttle has brought to this, that you might want to make sure that the independence of the auditing function is preserved, as we have in our office. I mean, it hasn't been a problem in the city, but you can envision an awful case of that, where somehow someone will get elected and mess up the civil service system and that. So there are ways of creating some independence, and we would be happy to explore that but the appointing authority should still be the controller, perhaps subject by confirmation by someone else, like the council. There's issues of fixed terms that have been discussed. There's pros and cons of all those because, the civil service system itself is supposed to have its own integrity. But we do think that there are ways of guaranteeing the independence of the auditing function, but there's no reason to split apart one of the smallest cities in the city where everyone's dedicated to the same common purpose, and it is a continuum of services.
Thank you so much, and thank you for always being at our committee meetings and advising us throughout this process. We look forward to continuing to work with you.
And we'd be happy to meet with individual commissioners, members of the audience. We do that regularly, and
you've been terrific. Thank you so much. Thank you. Let me just say a word to both the Commission and the public of where we are in a slight modification of the agenda out of consideration to those who are on our speaker list. We have two more invited speakers here, a representative of the CAO's office and then Bill Powers. Then what I would suggest to the commissioners is we have a few more speakers cards that we didn't get through. What I'd like to do out of consideration to those who've been waiting is take the public comments, and we'll hear all of the public comments. What I'm going to do, we have 8 people who have turned in cards so far. I'll ask each of them to speak for no more than 2 minutes, but they'll each get a chance to speak at this stage of the agenda. Then after that, we'll then go to the commission discussion. Of course, there'll still be more time for public comments later, but that way anyone who wants to be able to speak and has to leave would have the opportunity to do so. If I don't see any objections from commissioners, we'll do it that way. Let me now ask if there's a representative from the CAO's office who's here who wishes to speak with us.
Thank you. My name is Robert Chase. I'm the Assistant CAO, Executive Officer for the CAO. Not exactly a new city employee. I've worked for the city for about 40 years now. That's 4 mayors worth. We've had an opportunity to look at your commission's committee recommendations on the financial structure. I've heard several of the proposals tonight, the alternative proposals, heard the controller, and heard some discussion on debt administration. One suggestion, just listening to this, regarding the auditor, you may want to appoint the Daily News as the auditor for the city.
Okay. All right.
Give you a little background on that one specific issue that came up the other day as a major news item. You're asking if anybody is watching the city debt. The reason that came up is the CAO presented a report to the Mayor and Council on January 21st, giving them a heads up as to where we were in our debt program, what it looked like for the future, because we're talking about some planning for major police bonds for facilities, major library facilities issues. Those are very big issues, and added to our current debt, we could exceed the rule of thumb that Moody's and Standard & Poor's uses for a municipal government like we have to maintain our very high debt rating. Now, both Moody's and Standard & Poor's would take exception, I think, to the comments that the city's financial status, financial management structure is out of control or inadequate and needs to be totally revamped. just read you a couple little comments from Moody's and Standard & Poor's. Standard & Poor's said that a stabilizing economy, moderate debt levels, and a strong management team which has prudently addressed fiscal issues provide a very strong ability to pay debt service, talking about the city of Los Angeles. In 1997, Moody's said, the city's rating is based on reasonable budget assumptions which reflect the city's continuing economic recovery and strong budgetary and cash controls. Now, that's in contrast, I think, to some of the observations and perceptions that are in place. And I think as far as auditing and accounting, certainly the perception is you separate the two, auditing and accounting. In the city system, the accounting system starts basically with the city departments. Each city departments have an accounting staff. They review the purchase of materials, prepare the necessary documents, send it to the controller. This is after a city manager is signed off on what's taken place. Goes to the controller, and it gets into the first step of the accounting process, which is a pre-audit. They do the double checking and then fire it into the accounting system. And from there, the payments are made. The auditing, the post-auditing occurs later in the process. As Tim mentioned, they have an auditing division that at certain points in time go around and make a check of what took place, was it appropriate, and are we following the proper controls. In addition to that, annually, the city hires a CPA firm to take a look at all of our accounting transactions and controls to certify the books of the city. So it's a pretty tight-knit kind of financial control system that's in place as far as accounting auditing. And it's true, the perception is you should separate the accounting and auditing function. But that would probably cost more money, and unless we can identify specific reasons for doing that, when we took a look at it, we were at a loss to recommend any changes, even though possibly in a major reorganization of city government, if you had a blank sheet of paper, you might do it a little differently. What I'd like to comment on is the role of the CAO, which I think is key in the financial management structure of the city. The city administrative officer function was created in 1951, but prior to that, the 1925 charter set out a powers and duties of a director of the Bureau of Budget and Efficiency. Now, the director of that bureau was a civil service position appointed by the mayor. In that position, and the bureau was in existence from 25 until 1951. In 1951, this is just after Little Hoover Commission had taken a good look at city government, made some recommendations on change. The then mayor of Los Angeles recommended that this Bureau of Budget and Efficiency, which he personally appointed the director, be abolished, and that a city administrative officer position be created in the charter that would provide a central research budget staff for the entire city to work for both the city council and the mayor in the formulation of the budget with the mayor, and then in assisting the council in its adoption of the budget. The budget is only one facet of work that the CAO has responsibility for. There are several other functions, several divisions of the CAO's office. We have 4. One is a budget and capital programming division that has several functions within it that some have been addressed, some have not. One that has been addressed is the budget formulation responsibilities. The debt administration function is also contained within this budget and capital programming division. It consists of only 4 people. They coordinate the planning of the debt, work with the analysts at Moody's and Standard & Poor's, lay out a program each year for acquisition of major equipment, firefighting apparatus, heavy-duty street equipment, trucks, sanitation equipment, and so it amounts to several $1 million a year, but they can't do it alone. It's the budget division of the CAO that inputs into this debt program in order to size a debt program for the city. It's a very integrated kind of process. Same way, in the same division, we have a capital programming effort that puts together a 5-year capital program for the city. The office also has an employee relations division. Now that's been mentioned from time to time, but again, that division can't operate in a vacuum. It requires a lot of support from financial and budget staff, especially during the labor negotiations with unions.
Jump in about a minute, I'm sorry.
Okay. If those two functions are pulled apart, you're moving apart negotiations, labor negotiations, which drive about 80% of the city budget. I guess I can forget about many of the other functions. As far as the detail, there's emergency preparedness operations that are in the CAO's office. What point I guess I would like to make that the CAO I think has mentioned to you before, that it's important in this financial structure, whatever you come up with, to separate the day-to-day line accounting, auditing kind of functions from the policy analysis, from the budget and financial analysis functions. They require two different levels of staff. The financial and budget analysis groups should not be bogged down with the day-to-day heavy routine accounting, auditing, treasury functions, but should be set apart as a policy analysis group. And as it stands now, this group responds to both the mayor and council. We produce several thousand reports a year to the mayor and council, and are not encumbered by the day-to-day routine of accounting, auditing, treasury, and so on. I think that's basically what I wanted to point out tonight and get across to you. I think one of the proposals that was made tonight is that where you have a creation of two budget groups within the city, one mayor, one council, I think that would work, but it would be quite costly. You're going to set up a duplication of effort within city government. This is not the federal government. This is still a city, still a municipal government, and we're not so large that we can't use a central research, administrative, budget staff to respond to the mayor, to respond to the council, to respond to the public and other agencies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Did any commissioner have a question that they wish to ask? Janice?
Basically what I think we're all struggling with is this idea of obviously accountability, fiscal responsibility, protection of the taxpayer dollar, and I think obviously we've all been charged with the job of certainly seeing if something is broken, we want to be able to fix it, and we wouldn't be, giving our time to 2 or 3 meetings a week if we didn't believe in real charter reform. But there seems to be a conflicting opinions tonight whether certain things really are broken, and maybe we don't need to fix it. I certainly don't want to fix anything that's not broken just because we want to change things. It's interesting to me, considering that not separate from the reports we've been hearing about the horrendous debt that the city has been incurring, seems like Moody's and S&P has actually rated our city fairly high. What is our current bond rate for our GO bonds?
It's a AA rating, and of all the large cities in the country, there's only one city that's higher rated, and that's Dallas. And they have a lot of money down in Dallas.
So basically, the Wall Street is looking favorably upon.
They look very favorably to Los Angeles and our management.
I mean, I think that's something we ought to take into account. The other thing I was interested in reading some of these reports is the idea of the CAO's office projecting, having revenue projection in their office, and also preparing the budget. If there's anything that I think may be a little bit of a conflict, and you can respond to that, it seems to me if you have the same department projecting revenue and then also preparing the budget, seems to me you're more likely to want to make sure that you've projected enough revenue to cover the budget. Seems to me maybe those two functions should be separate. I'd like you to
That's a good point. It's certainly a temptation, but if you have to live with your revenue estimates, and if you're around very long, they'll come back at you and say that you missed it, you didn't do a very good job. And as a result of the experience with our financial management team, they're extremely careful. We deal with local economists checking our local economy because our revenues are basically driven by the local economy. The business taxes, the sales taxes, the document taxes on property, and so on. I think you'll find that we estimate our revenue within about 1% each year, and that's about the leeway. We've been doing a very good job. It's been difficult because of recent recessions and all, but it's tempting to easily balance a budget with, say, phony revenue estimates, but it doesn't work that way. It can't. It's not realistic.
Just a couple questions. 6% cutback for the police department next fiscal year. And I've received figures up to $100 million deficit going into next year's budget. You made a comment about the Daily News being the auditor. Well, it took Channel 2 to bring to the public the contamination in local restaurants. And it's sad that we have to rely upon the media to broadcast. Government should be protecting the people and should be there for that purpose since they're paid for by the taxpayers. When it comes to these deficits, it troubles me that the police department buildup, and now they're being told a 6% cutback. And even with that 6% cutback out of the $1 billion budget the police department receives, they're looking for a deficit of $100 million in the next fiscal year. Can you comment on that?
The mayor's budget is currently being formulated. We started our meetings today with the mayor and the general managers. The number that we're working with, that's correct in terms of a ballpark estimate of a gap that we have to close. And it can be closed in different ways. The 6% that you mentioned was an original budget policy letter to the departments, listing all the departments and asking the departments to come back and tell the mayor what an impact of X% would be on their budget. Police was given a number of 6%. Very high, in my opinion not very realistic, but it at least starts a process and the thinking process as far as police management. How can they do a better job with fewer resources and still maintain an effective field force, crime suppression force? It would be very difficult, I think, for police to cut their budget that much, but I think that there are economies in every department of city government where we can achieve this, solve the problem at least of the out-of-balance condition. We do it every year. We have to have a balanced budget. We can't finance the budget any other way. It has to be based on actual known revenues. Police is just one of a long list of departments that are going to be subject to a very careful review.
Thank you very much. I think at this point I'll say thank you and move on to our last invited speaker. Thank you so much. Sure. The final speaker is Bill Powers, who's the chair of Paula Boland's Committee Number 2, and I appreciate your waiting to speak until now. It seemed best to hear your remarks on finances in the context of discussing finances. We thank you so much for the report that we received from you tonight.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you and the entire commission for having the care and concern to be out here and to be working about problems that people out here I know have real concerns about. I think we in the public perceive Los Angeles in crisis. That's why we're looking at charter reform. That's why the Valley is looking at secession. We see fiscal mismanagement. We see resources applied where it doesn't make sense. We see an unequal application of resources in the San Fernando Valley. And because of that, people out here and I think in other areas feel unempowered. They feel like second-class citizens. This is a very serious issue. And as a result, we've taken a very serious look at this, and we've decided among our committee, and one thing we have not lacked is decisiveness. And that is that we have Bobby Fiedler and Harry Coleman on the committee, so it's impossible to be undecisive. We decided to take a fresh look. We felt unencumbered by current structures, and although we tried to be guided by them, but we came up with some ideas that we think are kind of unusual, but to the point, and we hope that they may be of some use to you. First of all, we've made some generalized conclusions. First of all, the city has to change the kind of revenue generation process it has. Secondly, it has to change the manner in which those funds are administered and controlled within the city's bureaucratic structures. And third, it has to change the manner in which the funds are allocated and controlled within the geographic and political divisions. We want revenue generation change, restructure of government, and local control. We have answered in our restructure segment each one of the 5 questions that you posed in the agenda, and I'll address those when we get to them. But before we get to that, we felt that there were 6 really essential points that needed to be stated. And these, I guess I could call them the 6 commandments of our commission. 1, that the budget must be balanced annually. Second, the taxpayer dollars not be utilized to subsidize private sector enterprise directly or indirectly. That charges to the public for essential public utility services such as water and power shall not exceed the actual cost of delivery of those services. We can't have grandmothers and poor people going without water and power. Fourth, that there should be one properly protected but integrated computer system for all city departments. Fifth, that city retirement plans must conform to ERISA and not the exemption that the city has to ERISA, but to ERISA. And finally, that no city bonded indebtedness can be incurred without a majority vote of the electorate. Now, because of the nature of our committee and the nature of this, the real complexity of this problem, we think that this takes a professional audit. While these hearings and studies by commissions and committees such as ours are very interesting, we think this really requires the dignity of a professional audit. You need the audit in order to make an intelligent decision. All of our input, really, when it comes right down to it, is anecdotal. You need more. So that's one of our primary recommendations. Now, getting into the revenue generation, we have some basic points. First of all, eliminate the gross receipts tax on business. This is anti-business. It discourages growth. And the cities of Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena have darn well proved that you don't need it to be successful. We need to increase the application of user fees. Let tax be allocated fairly to each population segment by the degree of burden that segment places on city government. How about seeking some other funding sources? Let's use some imagination. Public-private partnerships. Advertising. Why not? BID or other appropriate revenue sharing. Here's one interesting concept. Let's make all city departments self-justifying cost centers. Let's make them account in between departments. So the city attorney will have a budget, and it will bill other departments for their services, and vice versa. The budgets will interrelate. Distribute department overflow income equitably. Now, this is two parts. The first part is some city departments, harbors, airport, will generate more money than they can spend. Don't leave it in the pot. Put it into the city pot and then distribute it equally to each councilmanic district. Distribute that money equally. Local control is the way we think we should go. I think one of the things that we need to focus on is what is government. We must define government by necessity, not by convenience. We have too many departments, we have too many functions. Let's sit down and consider, what do we need government for? What is the purpose of government? Let's go through an analytical process and see if there's some fat that we can trim out. And then finally, and this segues into the next section, we need to restructure city government. We'll go into some more details about how. We have one proposal. We think it, interestingly, connects with a number of the thoughts that some of the previous speakers have spoken about. But the basic premise here is that when all these suggestions are implemented, we think the city will operate more efficiently and thus less expensively. More business will be attracted. More profits will be generated, more sales will take place in the area, and therefore there's more sales tax revenue. And that's how Burbank, Glendale, and Pasadena make it. Why can't Los Angeles? Lack of imagination. Don't get stuck in the mire of the past. Use your creativity. We got decisive, we got creative. We're not the end all, but you guys have just got a wealth of knowledge and experience and more available to you, and we urge you to use that to find the creative solutions that this city desires and is entitled to. It's more than just desiring, it really is entitled to. So in terms of restructure, we think the mayor's department should get a little more responsibility. We think the council and the mayor have had a push-me-pull-you fight over many generations over control, and we've come up with a suggestion for restructure, which combines control over administrative function in both the city council and the mayor, and I'll discuss that in a little bit. But the primary segment of this is the neighborhood council. We strongly endorse the idea of the neighborhood council. We think it should be 15 or more elected neighborhood councils. We think the council members for each councilmanic district should be the chair of each neighborhood council, but with just one vote. And the basic premise that will operate, much like in the federal-state devolution of governmental responsibility, what is not specifically given to the city council will reside, in terms of power, in the neighborhood council. So, the council would serve a function of articulating legislative mega policy, citywide mega policy, covering infrastructure, covering new coliseum, covering anything that attracts and affects the entire city. It would also maintain responsibility over the administrative arm of the government. All the city departments would operate under and be beholden and responsive to to the city council as well. Okay, structure. We think the mayor should continue to perform an executive and administrative, but also an administrative function, as should the council perform the legislative and administrative function at the mega policy level. We think that the administration of city departments, however, should be separate, yet report to the city council and mayor. So in your chart, you'll see you have the administration basically headed up by professional management, a CAO, who is also a city manager, who has real power, who has real knowledge and expertise, not to demean our CAO or any of the other folks that are operating so well in what we think is a city government that needs reform, but we would like to empower that office further. We'd like a budget office to report to the CAO. We'd like a separate city auditor's office to report to the CAO. We'd like all city departments to report to the CAO, including a finance department consisting of a chief financial officer, a city clerk responsible for tax collection, a treasurer responsible for oversight of investments and cash management, and a controller responsible for accounting. The neighborhood council would receive overflow revenue after the funding, the budget funding for infrastructure, major city-wide infrastructure, including departments and all that. The difference is going to go pro rata to each neighborhood council. Now that means that there will be equality of distribution. There will be empowerment. There will be local control. Now, local control basically ends up being the point, and with local control, we think will come accessibility. You're not going to have to go miles to talk to your local representative. You're going to get accountability because what needs to be done within that neighborhood council will be done because the people will make darn sure it happens.
Could I ask you to finish up in about a minute?
I'm wrapping.
Thank
and
you.
Finally, that the credibility of city government, which we feel has been all too compromised, will be increased, if not brought to a level of idealism. And at the same time, we believe this entire process, through the checks and the balances and the controls inherent in it, will put significant downward pressure to decrease the cost of government. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that excellent presentation and for your written report that's so detailed. Do any of the commissioners have questions at this time for Mr. Powers? Bennett?
I would just like to invite you to come back to the Committee on a More Responsive City Government with an Involved Citizenry, which after our presentation on city council districts on February 23rd, will be taking up the issue of neighborhood councils, and we would like very much to hear more in more detail about your proposals.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you again so very much. What we'll do now then is hear from all who have turned in comment cards so that you don't have to wait any longer than this to speak. I'll allocate 2 minutes for each speaker, and then the commissioners will have the opportunity for a discussion of what we heard tonight with regard to budget and finance. I want to start with David Fleming. Let me just read 3 at a time so that those who are about to speak can come up and we won't need to take a long time waiting. I have David Fleming. We're delighted to welcome you tonight. Leonard Shapiro and Fred Weinhardt is the first 3 speakers. Thank you for being here tonight with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As one who first suggested charter reform, and when it turned out that the council refused to allow an appointed commission to have its work product go directly to the ballot, I then called for the election of a charter commission pursuant to the state constitution and was joined by the mayor. The mayor and I co-chaired the initiative which made this possible, and I look at each one of you and I thank you so much on behalf of all of the citizens for the time you're taking to represent us to recreate Los Angeles city government. You're all to be congratulated. If I may, just a couple of broad brush suggestions, and I know we'll be talking more about this. Please bear in mind that your task is not to cure the ills of cities like Los Angeles. Your task is to create the mechanism which will cure those ills, and that's a big difference. I certainly concur with what Dr. Schockman said tonight regarding charters. They are constitutions, they are frameworks, they should not cover details. Let's put it this way. First of all, they have to be comprehensive. An 8th grader should be able to read and understand a city charter, assuming 8th graders could read, which we should work on too. Don't put anything in a charter that you don't want to impose upon the people the obligation to change. Now that to me is very important. Remember, everything in that charter can only be changed by a vote of the people. And we've seen so many elections where charter changes have come up and somebody looks at it and it's absolute gibberish. Even lawyers can't understand it. That's not fair to the people. I would venture to say that 90% of everything in that charter ought to be in the administrative code and be changed by the elected officials of this city. We should more or less follow the Constitution of the United States, which after all has only been changed 17 times in 220 years. The Constitution works. One other viewpoint I have, and that is this. Unlike the framers of the Constitution, you're starting from the other end. By that I mean, the framers of the Constitution had the parts in place. What they had to do is create an overreaching government. They had the states existed. They had to form a federal republic. I think you're on the other side of that equation. We have a city government. What I would like you to do is think outside the box about creating subdivisions of that city government, whether you call them boroughs or clusters of community councils or anything else. It doesn't make any difference. The point is that you have to bring government closer to the people, because common sense tells us that if a government is close to the people, a voter begins to trust it, to use it, to understand it, can get comfortable with it. Our problem is that we have a charter created when the city was 700,000. It's 4 times bigger than that now. We have to bring it closer. So let me suggest this, that you bear in mind the creation of some subdivisions of city government which would have the power to control those things that affect the quality of life of people, such as public safety, parks, libraries, non-arterial roads, some limited zoning that only affects that area of the city. And most of all, and this is where we're really going to get a little revolutionary, most of all would have the power to tax. Because with the power to tax goes the power to control things in that particular subdivision. So if they want to, for example, if they want to bring in a trash compactor facility and get the revenue off that, that may not be very nice to just ask people to agree to do that. But if they want the revenue off that, they can keep that revenue and use it for something that they need in their community. Because in this city, one size doesn't fit all. And that's the kind of area that I think you've got to start thinking about eventually in the future. Again, congratulations to all of you, and Godspeed, the best of luck. Thank you.
Thank you. And I hope very much, I hope we'll have the opportunity to hear from you and work with you a great deal more. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Mr. Leonard Shapiro is next. He left? Okay. Next is Mr. Fred Weinhardt, and then after that I have James Stewart and Dorianne Lee Parker.
Thank you. My name is Fred Weinhardt. I'm president of the Saddle Tree Ranch Homeowners Association in Sylmar. I also represent the Sylmar Chamber of Commerce. And since I only have 120 seconds, I appreciate David said a lot of the things that I would have liked to say myself. I'd like to make about 4 real quick points. One is remembering the very essence of what a charter is, and I think the comparison to the Constitution is very important, because what its function is to limit what government can and cannot do. It is, I don't think it's intended to give power to a body, but to restrict that power, and I think that's critical. The second point, I think, just like I think it was Jefferson who said that the Constitution is not worth the paper it's written on unless the constituency abides by principles in which it is assumed to exist when it was written. And I think the Charter will be the same thing. Unless we simultaneously work on the quality of our politicians and our elected officials, no Charter is going to solve all our problems. I'd like to address the couple of things that was said by the Controller's Office. Just the thought, I think the question was as to whether or not the controller is performing a controller's function. I think if we compare it to private industry, there should be many instances where a controller will actually question to death an expenditure, even if it's approved, even if it's budgeted. If it doesn't seem like a wise move, I think the controller does have the capability to actually stop something and say, what the heck is going on here? And I think the implication is maybe that's what's missing in the process. Lastly, on the thought of charter reform, detachment. Just like to make the point that charter reform is critical, that it's probably the only thing that will prevent detachment. And I think there's many of us here who would rather see a united city, a functioning city, than a divided city. But if it doesn't happen, detachment probably is the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. James Stewart, Dorianne Lee Parker, and Charles Church are the next three speakers.
Yeah, James Stewart. I'm with the Board of United Chambers of Commerce and the Mid-Valley Chamber of Commerce. I'd just like to make 2 points. First off, remember that the dollars that you spend tracking the dollars are also tax dollars. And we should not get ourselves into a point, which I think we are in today, where we're spending thousands to save hundreds. That is not responsible fiscal management. We could have a looser system and probably still not spend any more money, in fact, maybe save some money. When we have several levels of approval, each one of those levels costs money. The actual dollars in terms of salaries and overhead, and also decreases the value of the money. Money has a value over time. And as someone who has dealt with many organizations that have been owed money by the city on contracts, and it takes months to get money out of the city, even if it is a legitimate expense and approved by everybody up front. I work with the Valley Cultural Center. We get money from Parks and Recreations, from the council office. It takes 3 months and 12 pieces of paper to get that money, including asking questions like, it used to be, is any of your subcontractors doing business with South Africa? What is the ethnic makeup of your board, of the artists that you have served? All of these questions which are irrelevant to the actual control of the money. So let's not get into the idea that we have to track every dollar so much that we are spending thousands to save cents. And the idea of thinking out of the box, I would refer you to the book called Reinventing Government. There are many cities in this country who have adopted a new form of budgeting where they give a block amount to the department. No line items, no micromanagement, no saying you'll spend this much on salaries and this much on equipment and this much on supplies, but giving them the whole ball of wax and saying, here is the goals that we set for you, and you will be judged on the goals, not on how much money you spend. And let them spend the money the way that is wisest for them to do it. The city council doesn't know which books the library needs. The city council doesn't know how the police department needs to spend its money. Those departments know better. Let the departments do their jobs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dorianne Lee Parker, Charles Church, and Dorothy Boberg are the next three speakers. Is this Dorianne Lee Parker?
My name is Charles Church. I want to talk to you a little bit about accountability. I think we're worrying about it at the wrong end. I propose that we create a city efficiency manager. The purpose of that would be to meet with each of the functions that we're doing, like street cleaning, tree trimming, graffiti removal, whatever it is, once a year with citizens, have the people who are responsible for these jobs come in and explain how they do it and how they can improve their productivity. Right now, the inefficiency of many of our city workers approaches legendary proportions. We don't have to put up with that. It's obvious to anybody who looks at it that it isn't working. You're worrying about the money, and you should be worrying about how they're doing the job. I propose a city efficiency manager. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dorothy Boberg, Susan Barr Nelson, and Brian Hutchinger are the next three speakers that I have.
Well, now Dorianne Lee Parker is...
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah, we got out of order.
I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sorry, too. I wasn't quick enough to get up here.
Please.
I came to the Los Angeles area in the early 60s, and at that time, Los Angeles was almost utopia. It was almost paradise. And since that time, it has gone down, down, downhill. Somebody has been asleep at the switch, I think. And I am hoping that these charter reform commissions can help wake people up and find a way to make them stay awake and do something about making this city better and getting it back to where it used to be and straightening out some of the problems. when you're in charge of something, if you're in charge of a household, a family, it is up to you to make sure that you are maintaining the infrastructure and that you are maintaining law and order. And the people in charge of this city are supposed to be doing that, and they are not doing it. So please, I don't know what, I have no suggestions how to do it, but please help them do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Dorothy Boberg.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, I have three things that I would like to talk about. City concepts, long-term problems to be solved, and proposals for Northridge. There's an optimum size city and an optimum boundary, an optimum density of population for each community or city, which can be determined through research and discussions by the citizens of each community. Long-term as well as short-term planning should be done. Action on Los Angeles City Charter reform will probably be short-term, so it is necessary to elect commissions for each existing and proposed city to consider long-term changes now. Now, the long-term problems to be solved include each community should be responsible for developing plans to cope with the major changes expected in the next century or two, such as 1, the end of the age of petroleum, in which it will be necessary to have relatively self-contained cities with intra-city transportation systems, especially bikeways and pleasant walkways, as well as between city centers transportation network. 2, public opinion and policy to make desirable the 1 or 2 child family necessary to preserve endangered species, save forests, coastal and sea habitats, provide clean air and water, preserve farmland, limit global warming and ozone depletion, and participate in worldwide population problem solving. It is only by solving population size and density on the local level that the worldwide population problem will be solved. 3, the increasing number of home and small businesses based on computer technology will encourage development of more livable and beautiful small cities.
I apologize, but I'm going to ask you to finish up in about 30 seconds. We do have your report. Thank you.
Supporting local companies. 4, development and deployment of solar roofs for electricity and home heating and other conservation technologies. Then I don't have time to give you the proposals for Northridge, but I believe that Northridge should be an incorporated city with an optimum population boundaries, included school district, greenbelt, vegetation, gardens, and parks, so that a city could look more like Paris or small cities of Europe, and governed by an elected council with a Los Angeles County government controlling the larger issues.
Thank you so much. We do have your written report also, and I'll make sure that it's distributed to each of the commissioners. Thank you.
I'm Sue Nelson, here representing myself.
I'm sorry, say your name again.
Susan Nelson.
Thank you.
With Friends of Santa Monica Mountain Parks and Seashore Hillside Federation. And I'm only going to be brief because it's very late. And for one, I find this discussion really amazing. I've been involved in local government activism for about 30 years, and I learned more about the city this evening than I've ever known. So I appreciate the discourse. I think it's a very important thing that's happening. I do not support this chaotic representation of the grassroots at all that I hear coming from the Valley, but I do support an expanded city council, and I think the city council expanded should be connected up to the various community plan districts. Other than that, for this evening, I'm still listening to what this financial report is. In terms of the debt, I would like to say one thing. Unless you have revenue, all this financial department restructuring isn't going to mean a thing. The state was set up as the revenue guideline for the cities in an earlier era, that needs to be changed somehow or other. That's going to happen. We cannot have the rural governments making determinations about these high-density cities. This also includes Congress. If you look at the Senate, you're seeing that the rural areas are controlling the futures of our urban areas, and that needs to be changed. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 3 more speakers with cards: Brian Hutchings, Robert Lameshow, and Myrna Lightstone.
Hello, Commissioners. Brian Hutchings, Santa Monica. First of all, I want to say something about the debt and the Moody's places, Standards & Poor's and so forth, which is, first of all, budget balancing is a bogus concept. It's bogus at the federal level, and Clinton is, I'm sorry, wrong. I support him in most other measures about the the importance of balancing the budget. Not even in a family does it work. Anyway, you have to get into the international scene. You have to understand that there's a lot more to it. That's why I brought these newspapers. I'd like people to check out the newspapers on the international financial scene. It's really pretty horrible, and it's going to affect us. It already is affecting us, I'm sure you know. Now, the reason I sometimes refer to this process as Big Wand is because of the involvement of the Rand Corporation. And I suggest that people get a look at the preliminary so-called operations manual approach, the report of the Rand Corporation, that just followed the appointed commission's budgetary discussion, similar to this one, and came out that weekend following. And finally, this has come up, but it was basically passed through. It seemed to me from the staff report that part of the recommendations, the Integrated Financial Office and so forth, was passed through to the Government Officers Finance Association. That was where they got that. Yes. Now, another reason to worry about the Rand Corporation is because if you look at the Pentagon Papers were planned by Rand. It was part of a process, and that's why I sometimes worry about processes like these. Lastly, I have one thing that I want to do, which is on Friday at the LA City Council meeting, a friend of mine, Jerry Rubin, is going to be presenting an 18-foot Valentine to the UN. Please ask him to send that to the Iraqi children, not to the UN, because the UN is imposing sanctions on the Iraqi children. Lastly, please, could somebody give me a ride over the hill? I took the bus here, and it takes a while.
Robert Lameshow.
Good evening. My name is Robert Lameshaw with the Mid-Valley Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to commend the Commission on the hard work you're putting in to this process, but I'd also like to warn you about something. I've noticed in tonight's session a tendency to be getting involved in a lot of detail. We've talked about micromanagement. Most of the conversation here tonight really should have nothing to do with charter reform. Charter reform should be dealing with high-level responsibilities and high-level channels of authority. The charter should be simple. One of the arguably the most complicated country, most diverse country in the world has a very simple constitution. The charter should not be a detailed blueprint. I would suggest that an executive branch should be responsible for all administrative functions. And that should be about the extent that the charter refers to it. The legislative branch, the city council, should be responsible for such items as finance and approving the budget. They should not be involved with any administrative functions. The problem we have today is that the city council runs the city. They do the budget, they do the administrative functions, the department heads are responsible to them. This commission and the new charter should not concern itself with the details of administration, and I've seen where even tonight you're starting to get bogged down in a lot of those details. Let me warn you to avoid that tendency. Thank you.
Thank you. The final speaker card I have is from Myrna Lightstone.
I'm Myrna Lightstone, and I'm representing myself. I have a big mouth, and I like to tell people what I think. And I think this city is too big. I think it should be split up between the valley and the city. And the school system, which is a total shambles and was back in the 60s and 70s, is totally mismanaged. There was mismanagement in the school system then, there's mismanagement in the school system now, and a tremendous waste of money. When I read that they don't have enough books, and I see them being thrown out the windows of the schools, it makes me sick to my stomach. The burden of the taxes has fallen on the homeowners, and we are the ones that are bearing the burden year after year for everything that's being done. I'm angry to have to put my dollars into things that are waste. I'm tired of calling the Department of Water and Power to complain about my bill on my water bill, and then I get turned around from one department to the other, and the Water and Power is managing itself. And nobody does anything, and I have a tiny lot, and I'm paying $500 a month, or $500 every 2 months for water and power. If you want to cut money out of the budget, start consolidating your departments in the government. I agree with the gentleman who was just up here. Start cutting your salaries. Everyone should take a 10% cut off the top. We've been in a recession since 1990. Take your cuts from the mayor who doesn't take a salary to the councilmen to all the people that they employ. Start with cutting the fat out of this government. We in the Valley are so fed up with being overburdened by what happens in the city. I had a business in the city, and we were taxed up the kazoo.
If I could ask you to finish up in about 30 seconds.
And the crime there was unbelievable. After my partner got attacked in the store on Pico, I decided to close my business in the city and move to the Valley. Being in real estate over the last 10 years, and I don't even want to get into that because the governor needs to deal with this and all the things that are happening in real estate today with people who have been earthquake damaged, lost everything, are turning around selling their houses with no disclosures of earthquake damage, and asbestos in the houses that are being sold. These houses are being sold as good houses. So you need to get somebody in charge to start dealing with all these issues that need to be dealt with.
Thank you. I know it seems late to us, but the agenda is planned was for a 4-hour meeting. So still on our planned agenda, we have an hour to go.
Okay. I'm ready.
And we need to, I think while all of the useful comments we've heard about budget and finance are in mind, start discussing that. Could I just offer as a suggestion that we take 1 minute in place and just stand and stretch before we take the next hour of our work?
Thank you.
Every speaker, everyone. Well, now we can.
Yes.
I'm going to call us back to order.
I'm just going to stretch here.
My suggestion to my fellow commissioners is that we use this as an opportunity for discussion with regard to budget and finance in light of everything that we've heard tonight, that we not try tonight to vote or make decisions, but that we will schedule another meeting sometime relatively soon, probably after we've had yet another commission meeting on another topic, to go in depth in the issue and then make our tentative decisions. Certainly, there could be motions, but that would be my suggestion. At this point, if I could have everyone's quiet and call us back to order. Do commissioners wish to speak on the matter that's before us concerning budget and finance?
Yes.
Rob?
I would appreciate it if we could go over the committee report with respect to those items where consensus. I just want to know which items again. I tried to write it down, but I'd like to know what items the committee had consensus on and kind of carve those out. And I'd like to hear from anyone who, on the commission, who does not agree In other words, I think part of the process that we should go through here is to see what, even if we're not going to take a tentative vote, what items do we have consensus on? We have consensus that, for example, the controller, irrespective of the power, the allocation.
Again, I could ask for quiet in the room so that we can conduct our business.
Irrespective of what powers, post-audit, pre-audit, if we have consensus that the controller's office should remain elected, then I think we should move on and let's focus on the other issues. But if we could just find out what the committee, again, had consensus on.
Nick, would you like to summarize those?
Sure. Yes, it would be my hope that by the end of the evening, on the matters that we did receive consensus, that the full commission would follow the committee's recommendations, or if not, at least have a debate tonight that we could tentatively come up with some vote. The areas that we did have consensus on are, the issues, that we did have consensus on was that on letter on letter A, the accounting and auditing would be segregated.
Page 1?
Page 1 of the summary page, yes. Okay. On letter B, that the controller...
Nick, where are you again?
On summary page 1.
That's not the introduction, is there a separate?
It's separate, it's right before the introduction. Second page. Second page of the report.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just going off the summary, which would be... To your report? No. Don't have your report. Where's your binder? My report got lost. Okay, that's where I'm at. Summary, page 1. Everyone see that?
Yes.
Under A, accounting and auditing would be segregated.
Is that A2?
Yes, A2.
2A.
Wait.
A2. There's no consensus as of yet. I'm sorry, there is consensus in terms of assigning the pre-audit to the elected controller. That would be B. Now, under the second issue, controller auditor, should it be appointed or elected? It's elected.
For the pre-audit functions, right?
To the pre-audit functions, right. Or what we're calling the accounting functions,
Right.
There is consensus that Department of Finance should be created under the mayor's office.
Okay.
Under D, the city budget office, there's no longer consensus. At one point there was to create a budget office under the CAO, but Commissioner Chemerinsky has provided a different model for his perspective.
So will that have further discussion, or?
That would require further discussion.
Okay.
And under the CAO, I will take chairmanship liberty at this point and actually say that we do have consensus, because even under Chemerinsky's model, there are still some roles or functions that a CAO would perform. Something that is not in the report, but based on the information we now have before us, there will be a CAO. There is a division in terms of what task it will perform, but there is a CAO.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
So that summarizes where we are with the committee report.
Well, I was going to ask if there are any members of the commission that have points of view that they want to express that are contrary to or in conflict with or questions with respect to those items where the committee has consensus.
I see Chet and Bill and Gloria and Jackie and Marcus. Chet, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Let me just say, first of all, that I really appreciate the quality of the report that's been put together, as well as Erwin's always excellent responses and viewpoints. I do respectfully disagree with the approach. As most of you know, and we've talked about it before, I tend to look at things a little bit more holistically. So the separation of these items into 5 distinct parts, while I agree with some and disagree with some others, I'm really more concerned with the whole. The issue of the controller being appointed, let me just say that, and that's the B issue, I am not so much interested in let me try it another way. I'm very concerned about looking towards management principles that will in fact increase the quality of life for our city, not just save dollars, but possibly provide better services. And the fundamental issues that I see are clear lines of responsibility and therefore clear lines of authority. And I'm really more interested in value than I am in the quantity of taxes, although certainly I don't like to pay taxes any more than anybody else. But when I do pay my taxes, I'm looking for the value. My concerns are not about the honesty of every single department head. I want to start with the preface that the department heads and the folks working for our city are basically honest people trying to do a decent job. But it's about good management responsibility, and holding people responsible means that they must have clear lines of authority, they must have clear responsibilities, and then you can make them lead towards that responsibility. I think we are using the wrong terms when we look at the whole process of the city controller, the difference between audit and financial accounting. Auditing is not management. And right now, the controller, as I understand it, is involved in the management process because he or she is in fact having to sign off on checks. That's part of management. I really see a different form of government. I see a form of government where you have a mayor who is responsible as the chief executive officer, the executive branch, of running the government, of getting things done. I see a council who is responsible for setting policy, for establishing what the goals are of the city and establishing the policy by which the mayor needs to abide by, and therefore his departments need to abide by. And I see a different role for what has commonly been called the controller. And that is, in my mind, for lack of a better term, an auditor general. Somebody who is responsible independently, and therefore I do believe that they need to be elected independently, to oversee not only the financial positions of our city, but also the management positions. So I would therefore say that in my scheme of things, the city Auditor General, again, please do not hang me on the term, but that's the best I can come up with at this point, would be responsible for financial auditing of the city throughout the process, not just after the bills are paid, but as an auditor, spot checking, doing whatever he or she finds necessary to make sure that we are financially doing what the city has said that we should be doing. I also believe that he should be doing a management audit. How can we do it better? And at the same time, I think that there's a place for the city controller or this this auditor general to provide the basis of information that all of us, all members of the city, could make their decisions. That is to say, a large chunk of the CAO's functions, that is pulling together the pro formas, the audits, the financial information, I believe should be under this Auditor General as an independent body whose sole responsibility is to make sure that the council and the mayor's responsibilities are being fulfilled. With that in mind, I would then go on to say that the city controller or auditor general should be elected. I don't understand how under any scheme you would want to elect somebody to do your financial accounting. That is something that you can appoint. Your auditor needs to be elected or needs to be at a much higher plane. With that, and then I go down through the rest of the list and I can make my judgments. And I'll stop at this particular point. I think that this has a great deal to do with the direction by which the Structure Committee is working on, and I think that they all need to be integrated.
I have Bill, Gloria, Jackie, Marcos, and I also wish to speak, and then Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to focus my comments on the issues on which the committee had consensus and the ones that I have some concerns about. And first of all, my take on the accounting or pre-audit and then the post-audit functions is that the pre-audit or accounting function should be in the Department of Finance by someone who's appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the city council, and the auditing or post-audit function should be by an elected controller. I'm concerned about the consensus view of the committee that the pre-audit should be, or that the post-audit should be by an independent person appointed by the mayor and confirmed by the council for a 6-year term. And one of the concerns I have is circumstance where you have possibly a mayor running for re-election who's appointed this post-audit controller, and you know, he's in a big fight with a challenger. The challenger wins, and you have the new mayor who's going to be reviewed by the controller who's appointed by his predecessor, who was basically his political enemy. I'm not sure whether that's such a good idea. And I think that the post-audit should be done by someone who's accountable to the people. I think that's where the best checks and balances will lie. I'm not so concerned about I guess the committee's concern about having the pre-audit or accounting function performed by someone in the finance department, because the mayor is going to be accountable to the people, and as one of the speakers said, the auditing function is done almost simultaneously these days through computer reports, etc. So I think the check will be there almost immediately. Let me just see if. Okay, I think those are basically my concerns. So those are the only areas where I would disagree with the consensus of the committee.
Okay, Gloria?
Yeah, I would like to see if we can get a response to Chet's questions, first of all. I think he raised some points that I'd like some more clarification about as well. And then secondly, again, I like the flow chart model, so I'm going to ask, I know, me and my flow charts. In terms of looking at the role of the controller, and again, looking at the separation, sort of where it fits into, so sort of, if you can start painting a picture for us in terms of how you're blending together these models, that would be helpful to me.
You can look at the packet that we handed out. One of the models that you have is Model 1, Chart 6.3 in the report, which is called the Elected City Auditor Report.
Okay, wait, let us find that. What number is it?
6.3, Chart 6.3. That's the only one. It's in the actual report itself.
Okay.
That's as close as you're going to get for tonight in terms of having an elected city auditor, a mayor with a sort of his own finance office, and then within the finance office will be the accounting.
And then can we get a response to some of the questions that were raised by Chet? Because I think there were questions that would be...
Now, do you want to keep going with the speakers? Just the ones that are on the list? And
well,
then come back.
Well, if we could get a response so we don't, I think, lose the questions that were asked.
I don't think Erwin would go for that.
I'm not sure what the questions were because he made 4 or 5 points, but I've discussed this with Chet before, and the basic premise that the commissioners took in the committee was by example. One of the main examples articulated was that a prior controller had prevented a prior mayor from irresponsibly spending money for lack of a better word, a junket to some, with some commissioners, some lame duck commissioners, and that was done, I'm just giving you a synopsis, okay? That was done during the accounting process. And so the premise was that in order to empower the elected independent person to stand up to the mayor or to the council was to have them be responsible for the accounting, and that way they can stop the spending before it's done. But I will indicate that we did not and do not have a cost-benefit analysis that has been addressed by the person who spoke from the public, is if we're spending thousands to save pennies. That was not reviewed at this point because we looked at it more as a policy issue. Do we want to separate these two? And then the secondary issue is, what is the most efficient way to separate these two? And so we answered the first one only, which is we do want these separated, the accounting and the auditing. And I'm sorry if I didn't answer Chet's questions, but that's sort of the premise where we were working from.
Jackie?
I'd like to join Chet in commending the committee for their report. I did have a little bit of trouble reading it because mine was somewhat faded, so I will take some additional time. But my comments are related to asking the committee if they could, for future discussion, more clearly indicate the ways in which the consumers, be they residents or business providers of the city, can have significant and meaningful input into the budget as it is being developed, as opposed to reacting to documents and decisions that have already been made. It's something that would help our committees. We do our deliberations, and I would think even if we're considering neighborhood councils, ways in which it can be done without it being an extremely uphill battle.
Thank you. I have Marcos, me, Bennett, Dennis, and Paula.
Well, I just wanted to say that protection of the taxpayers' dollars is not just the responsibility of the Controller's office. It's the mayor, the council, the media, the people of the city of Los Angeles. They all have equal responsibility in making sure that our tax dollars are properly spent. The present system of recording and reporting and analyzing the city's financial stability should be improved, and it should be centralized under one jurisdiction. It should be centralized under the mayor's office. I concur with that. The present check and balance system that has been working since 1925 is a good one, but we can make it stronger. And I agree with the recommendation to split some of the responsibilities, pre-audit and post-office. Pre-audit and post-audit. But each function needs to be independent of the council, the mayor, and the controller. We can't say that the council will appoint someone in the post-audit position and say that that'll be independent. That part of it should also be an elected position, just like the present controller who is elected. It'll make it stronger, and that position should only be answerable to the voters. And so that's the only part where I disagree. The post-audit function should also be an elected position. It would make our present check and balance system a stronger one.
I have me, Bennett, Dennis, Paula, and Janice. I just want to speak briefly to the parts of the report where we do have consensus. I think there are two items, and I think they're both crucial. One is creating a Department of Finance. What's striking is that all of the witnesses who testified before our committee, and that includes the controller, representatives of the mayor's office, CAO, have seen a benefit in creating a centralized Department of Finance, taking the various tasks with regard to financial management and planning and centralizing them. It was also something that was proposed by the GFOA report and by the Reining Commission more than 25 years ago. The only thing that I've added to that, that's a slight difference between Nick's proposal and mine, is I am concerned that we're asking a department to perform several very different tasks. The revenue collection task that's now in the city clerk's hands, the revenue management task that's in the city treasurer's hands. I believe, based on what Paul and others said tonight, there should be a specific office of debt management, and there needs to be an office of grant management. And rather than just assign the tasks and let them be combined in any way, I would prefer to be separate departments for these clearly distinct tasks. I can't imagine any point where these tasks won't always be distinct. Revenue collection will always be separate from investment. That will always be different from debt management. So I can't imagine how that distinction would ever become obsolete in the future. And that's the only detail that I would add. The other thing that I would speak to where there's consensus is having what's been called tonight the pre-audit function separate from the mayor and the city council in an elected official. I am strongly persuaded that the best protection of the taxpayers' dollars is to make sure that they're not improperly spent to begin with. To find out that they've been wrongly spent later on doesn't bring those dollars back to the city treasury. And the check that we have is the pre-audit that's done by the controller. The mayor expressed concern that the pre-audit function in the controller's office was leading to delay in the paying of city bills. So I went to the controller's office and asked about this, and they showed me documentation that the average delay in payment from the moment the bill arrives at the controller's office until it is paid is 3 days. And that's not their own documentation, that's external documentation. In other words, the delay that comes in payment is delay before it gets to the controller's office, not delay within the controller's office. And to me that's key, because if delay isn't the problem, then there's no reason to put the pre-audit function within the mayor's office. And I worry not for this mayor, but someday where there may be a less scrupulous mayor who may propose something to the city council, and the city council may reject it. And then if the mayor is in charge of the pre-audit function, the mayor's office could just then approve it. And so I strongly support the committee's recommendation that there be a pre-audit function in an independent elected controller. And I'm not yet speaking to the issues where there's not consensus. We can come back to those. I have Bennett, Dennis, Paul, and Janice.
Actually, Chairman, the comment you just made on the 3-day turnaround time was one of the things that I'd hope to highlight, because it hadn't been mentioned yet. There were some comments that might have led people to believe to the contrary earlier. I think the most persuasive comments that we've had tonight have been those of the fact that our bond rating is so good. And I would be concerned that we are proposing to make changes perhaps only for the sake of making change. I've heard of hypothetical cases that could happen in the future, but I haven't heard of any issue that's been before the city, at least in my memory, that the current system hasn't been able to deal with in a timely and proper manner. So I've received a lot of information tonight. Maybe some of the information I'm looking for that I just mentioned is in these papers, and I for one would like to analyze that further before voting tonight. Thank you. Thank you.
Dennis?
Yes, as a member of the committee, one of the concerns I had, and I was very adamant about it, is that we be proactive and not reactive. And traditionally, government is reactive. It's nice to call the fire department after your house burns down, but you want to put a smoke detector in to prevent it from burning down. So it was of great concern that we would have the pre-audit side covered from an independent office, that being the Office of the Controller. I want to emphasize to be proactive and not reactive. We remind ourselves of New York, bankruptcy, Orange County, and Northern California counties that had major fiscal problems. They didn't have a proper checks and balance. And regarding the Office Department of Finance, we heard from the LA City Fire Chief, who reported that they have a 55% recovery rate on the paramedic service, which means that they're losing approximately $30 million a year. People who are using services of the LA City Fire Department paramedic service, and the city's not receiving the cost of that after the people are billed. So those are necessary. The Department of Finance, the fact that we change the form of government and be proactive instead of reactive, and I would emphasize That's what our watchword was, to watch the taxpayers' dollars in this endeavor. Thank you.
Thank you. Paula?
I'd like to look at the chart and thank the committee and Nick for a fine report tonight and in-depth time and study that they've made. Because we're hearing so much from all over the city that it's vital that we go from the bottom up instead of the top down as we've been going in this city, I believe that we need to start now before we make any decisive plans at looking at some of the dollars going back to the districts. I understand there are proprietary departments, there are things that are fixed where dollars have to go. But we need to look where the money goes to find out what goes wrong in a city. And if we can come to a manner where the money is given out to the districts, and those districts, those neighborhood councils, as was the report that Mr. Powers made here, would determine their district's own needs, but it was fair, equal, apportioned so that it was equal. You now have districts on the same footing as all others, and the fight isn't over money. And you've now empowered the people to make some of their own districts. There are districts going to need streets and lighting, there's others going to need and have other problems, but they need to be able to manage their own dollars. And before we put anything in concrete, we truly need to Mr. Chair, we truly need to study this aspect of the budget. The other area, I believe that in looking at the report that was made to us, by having the 3 different departments and having the CAO that's overseeing everyone, I believe would end up giving us more accountability at the lower levels. As we discussed earlier tonight, it's just not working the way it is. We should have known a long, long time ago about the problems we were having. It shouldn't be 3 years or 4 years later when we're already so much in the soup that we can't get out from under. If we put the onus on, it just, you know what, it just takes to look at the smaller cities. If we look at Simi Valley, Glendale, Burbank, Pasadena, with their city managers, and we look at the way their fiscal structure is, one, their revenues, they're healthy cities, they're business friendly, as evidenced in recent news, major business leaving Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley, as a matter of fact, because of the tremendous savings in business taxes alone to move a huge facility to Burbank. We're all going to pay the price. We can say that we can't operate unless we operate under the business tax kind of system we have now, but if everyone keeps leaving, there aren't any dollars anyway. It's a declining revenue, certainly. And I would hope that we would just look at some of the, I don't want to take any more time, and I would like to talk to the committee further on the report that you've heard tonight and some other ideas, if I may, rather than take more time tonight. But I would hope that we would analyze these aspects of the budget.
I have Janice, Gloria, Chet, Nick, and Bennett.
Thank you. I too would like to commend the committee for their long hours of work and study. I too would echo my fellow commissioners' comment on making sure that we don't rush to fix something that's not broken. I have yet tonight, and through everything that I've been reading over the weekend, really have heard any compelling arguments on why we need to separate the pre-audit and the post-audit functions from the Comptroller's office. I still don't understand why that's a problem. Even Irwin said in his report to us, Los Angeles has one of the best records of any city in the country in avoiding serious financial scandals in the spending of city funds. And we heard that our general obligation bonds are rated AA, which is, you know, the highest except for one city in the country. So it seems to me we do have some incredible fiscal responsibility. I do agree that the problem of debt management probably needs to be isolated, and I'm in favor of a debt advisory board like the state has. But I have yet to hear why we're so concerned about the post-audit and pre-audit functions in the Controller's office. I have yet to understand why that's a problem. I also want to say that, you know, in terms of democracy, I don't want us to forget that the one power that the people of Los Angeles have is in electing the people to represent it. And the ballot box is still the most powerful tool that the people have. And we do have 3 elected officials that run citywide. They're the only 3 people that are voted on by every voter in the city of Los Angeles. And I'm concerned that while we attempt to change the charter, we're attempting to maybe give power in positions that are not elected. And I would be more inclined to beef up the elected positions, the mayor, the city council, and the city controller, as opposed to giving more power to departments and appointed people that the people have not elected and have no recourse to remove from office. So I'm a little nervous that we're tending to put more power in appointed positions and departments under the elected officials, as opposed to giving them the power they need to run the city. I'm interested to know if you've looked at making the city controller the chief financial officer of the city. We talk a lot about the New York City model, and that comptroller, as they call it in New York City, is actually almost as powerful as the mayor. So we keep referring to New York City as being a model that we should pattern ourselves after. Have we looked at making the city controller the chief financial officer and putting this Department of Finance and all the financial functions under the city controller as opposed to the mayor? What about that?
No. Gloria?
On this point, I would support the separation of the pre- and post-audit functions. I do think there are a number of compelling reasons that would go ahead and merit that, the separation. I also think, too, that regardless of what today's ratings of the city may be, we're trying to write a charter that will benefit essentially the 21st century, and we really don't know what may happen to city finances as we go down the line, so that whatever charter we try to develop at this point, I think, should be able to accommodate a functioning, efficient, accountable system of government, irrespective of what the present bond rating may happen to be. So I would support the separation of the functions. However, I guess my question would be that we have an independent person appointed by the mayor, fine with me, but then it says it's confirmed by the council, and I would ask, if the person is confirmed by the council, what about the question of removal? In a sense, could the person be removed by the mayor, or would that have to go back and be subject to council approval, a supermajority of the council? I think we need more clarification there. I do think the appointment of a 6-year term is problematic, and precisely for a reason that was previously raised, we could have a 1-term mayor, unless we decided to change the term of office of the mayor to 6 years. But I would hate to sort of tie the hand of a following mayor who is stuck with a controller that he or she may not necessarily want. So I would urge that we reconsider that and have the term to coincide with whoever the appointing authority happens to be. If it's a 4-year mayor, then go with a 4-year controller. If it's a 6-year mayor, go with a 6-year controller. And if I can have some discussion from the committee as to what your thoughts were on those points.
I have Chet, Nick, Bennett, Rob, and Paula, and at some point we should decide whether we wish to continue this or we wish to postpone the discussion to another day when we'll have more time. But I will continue to go through the list, and then maybe after we've gone through those who've requested to speak, we should decide if we want to continue or just postpone. Chet?
Yes, as an aside, I would just like to
suggest to staff that while this kind of a layout works well for our audience, we really need to have a bent system here, a U-shape, so that the audience can participate and we can see one another in our discussion. That's an aside, and I hope we can take care of that in other places. I have a couple of comments. First of all, if in fact you're going to split the two functions, it seems rather strange to me that the appointed function would be the auditor and the elected function would be the accountant. In private business, we would always look for an independent auditor, somebody to come from the outside to check and verify that we in fact are doing it correctly. Now in government, that would be an elected person, somebody who is not subject to any kind of control or action by other elected officials. So assuming that we are going to split them, and maybe we won't, but if we were to split them, I would urge that we really look at a reversal of the process. The second comment I want to make is about the 3-day turnaround, saying that if it's not, broken, don't try to fix it, it's okay, it's working, we have high ratings. We have excellent ratings, and I'm glad they're there, and we need to protect that in terms of the financial community. Where we do not have excellent ratings is in terms of how the business community in this city wants to function and work for the city. And it's not because the controller doesn't turn the checks over in 3 days or whatever, and I certainly would bow to those numbers, and I don't have a problem with it. It's about lines of authority. It's about who do you hold responsible because, in fact, something doesn't occur. And we have firsthand knowledge of that in our hiring of our staff and trying to get all of that cleared up. And I'm not blaming any department. They were doing their job, but the fact is there was no single person to go and say, this commission has hired somebody, we want it signed, sealed, and delivered, get it out, because that person has a right to get paid. That happens throughout our community. So my concerns, and I'm not hung up on it, but my concerns are more about how do we make a more efficient government, and all of the checks and balances at what expense. We could probably add another 2 layers to check the controller and check the auditor and check a whole bunch of people, but we would probably agree that that's too much. I think that what we need to have here is to recognize that an auditor, whether it's outside or inside, elected or appointed, an auditor can do their job continuously through the process. That is different than the person who signs the check. Even if the auditor stands over their shoulder, they're clearer and they're cleaner than if they're signing the check. So I urge you to separate those two positions and to put the auditor in a position to really do their job and, in fact, expand their responsibilities.
Thank you. Nick?
I think it would be, we have a great opportunity tonight to clarify some issues, and what I'm hearing from most of the commissioners, if not all, is that the accounting and the auditing should be separated in terms of making some decisions. Not necessarily that the accounting should be the person elected or the auditor should be elected, but at least that issue. And someone brought up that sometimes you get the expression, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, And I've told people and I've talked to people about the way you can look at this. And the way I look at it, and I'll give you an analogy, is sometimes when I'm at home, I will get a glass of water. I will drink from the glass. When I take my second drink, I notice that the glass has a crack. I'm still drinking from that glass, but there's a crack in it. I'm the kind of person that puts the glass aside and gets a glass that doesn't have a crack in it. I'm not the kind of person that waits for that crack to turn into something broken. The professionals, the other individuals who have spoken to us have agreed that keeping the accounting and the auditing together is a crack in the system. Sure, we might be holding water today, and it might be functioning fine, but I think we need to separate these before we all get wet. And that's the way I look at this one issue. Now, the comment about the elected officials, I want to remind everyone, and you may not know this, but in Orange County, when they went bankrupt, the treasurer there was an elected official. And when the moment of truth comes down to who the voters are going to hold accountable for that fiasco, they didn't turn on themselves and say, it's our fault, we elected this incompetent treasurer with only a high school degree. They went to the Board of Supervisors, their legislative branch. Now, if you really believe in representative democracy, you would really support the position that the two bodies that should have the most authority in running the city are the mayor and the council. Because I've never heard of anyone asking for the resignation, and I'll pick on Janice's brother at this time, just by example, of the city attorney because the city council approved a budget, approved a contract that went south on them. They always hold those two bodies accountable. So in our proposal, or at least the proposal that I'm suggesting, I'm trying to get the two people who are at the end of the day going to face the barrel of the gun the tools to do the job. Otherwise, it just seems basically unfair for them to be held accountable by the voters and some other person we can't put our finger on, like on the debt issue, out there that we can't hold accountable. So I want to streamline this and get a line of authority, and that's why I've recommended the Department of Finance with those tasks, someone we could put our finger on. So I think that we should at least tonight make some tentative decisions, because remember, these decisions are subject to, one, further public comment, two, integration with the other committee's recommendations so that we can have a full picture at the end of this process, but we're not going to get anywhere until we start putting some pieces in place. So I really would like us to make some decisions tonight. I don't want to table these discussions. So if we can vote on at least the one issue of separating the accounting from the auditing that we have consensus on, I'd appreciate that tonight.
Nick, I think I hear a desire on the part of many commissioners to have further study before we make any tentative choices. So my recommendation would be that we not make any decisions tonight, but that instead what we'll do is schedule a meeting on a Saturday in late February or early March to take up this topic and the topic considered in the next meeting, and then make our tentative choices. If you wish to make a proposal, or someone wishes to make a motion to table, we can vote on what the sense is, but in just counting the number of people who have spoken, my sense is most people would prefer, I think, to wait and have a chance to digest this before voting.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, I mean, can I ask this as a straw poll, just, this isn't a motion or anything like that, how many people would prefer to wait before voting? How many prefer to make any decision? How many prefer to wait and not make any decisions tonight?
Depends what we're voting on.
Of course.
Well, I was so impressed with your passion for this that I would vote just to separate the things, just to give you a something, because you were so splendid. But otherwise, I would just move to
Almost everyone, Nick, raised their hand to wait. And we will come to this very soon, but I think what we'll do is take this up and make decisions at another meeting on this topic to be scheduled within the next few weeks.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Chet?
I wonder, in order to help Nick along and help his committee along, and maybe all of us, if we would be willing as a committee to say at 10 of 10 on February 9th, on a straw poll, we tend to favor splitting them in two, so that we can get a sense as to where we're going. This is not a vote casting concrete, but at least it begins to say we're in a direction and we're ready to go in this point.
I think unless I am directed otherwise by the commissioners, I'm going to take the unanimous show of hands that I saw to wait, to not do a straw poll. I think that the committee had the opportunity to hear literally every commissioner speak on this topic. And I actually want to rethink my views again on some of it, having had the chance to hear from my colleagues. So again, if there is a motion to overrule my judgment here, I would welcome it. But I think what I'm going to do is defer this to a meeting very soon. We'll have an in-depth discussion and then make our tentative choices. Yes, please, Nick.
Just so that the record's clear, I understand you're assessing the sentiments of the commission, but obviously it's not my desire to prolong this process. We need to get going, so I'm not making the motion, but I would like the record at least to reflect that. I'm not in consensus or in agreement with the other commissioners. I think we have enough information. We've presented information that people can make a decision on, and I would like to make decisions tonight.
I appreciate that. And I think it's important, since this is our first chance to have an in-depth discussion of a topic, to be feeling our way for how we're going to be doing this. And my guess is that often what we'll need to do is have in-depth presentations and conversation, then take some time and then come back very soon. Nick, you're absolutely right. We can't wait very long before making our tentative choices, because we do need to be making those decisions as to where we think we want to go in the charter so staff can begin. So it's just a short postponement is all that I think the Commission is asking for here, a chance to reflect, if that's okay. If Bennett, Rob, and Paula will agree to defer their comments till later, we'll wait until then, but if you wish to speak now, you were on the speaker list.
Actually, I wanted to raise a slightly different issue.
Okay.
And I'll just do it briefly. There's, in section, based on a lot of the public comments that were made tonight, in section 382 of the charter, it says at the end of each fiscal year, any department that has surplus funds, in other words, if it hasn't used up all of its money, needs to return the funds to the reserve fund of the city rather than benefiting from any good work it did to save the taxpayers money. And I would, if we're looking for policies that might make our city more entrepreneurial, I would suggest that maybe we'd be looking at section 382 at some point and look at that as a fiscal or financial reform.
Nick?
Commissioner Kaiser Bennett. We are, and Dennis Zine has presented that issue repeatedly, and it is on our plate of things to consider, is to somehow proactively or somehow reward departments for good work. And we are looking at that as an issue. It just wasn't one of the first 5 that we identified.
Okay. Rob, and then Paula?
Well, I think if we're going to postpone even taking some tentative votes on this, the observation that I'd like to share, I've got an open mind on a couple of these issues, is the following. I go back to some of the goals that we've talked about at the beginning that I think we ought to be looking for every time we debate an issue, and those are accountability, efficiency, responsiveness, and balance of power. I don't think if you ask the voters, people that are watching this on cable, people that were here tonight, if they feel that the city structure, not the decision makers, but the structure is fiscally responsible, accountable, efficient, responsive, that you're going to get people to say yes to that. A case in point, if you're familiar with the cost overruns in on the issue of upgrading the city's emergency system, I had some involvement in that. And I remember asking the question, who is responsible for watching this? And I was directed to the CAO. When I went to the CAO, they directed me to the Fire and Police Commission. When I went to the Fire and Police Commission, they said that I should go talk to Info Technology, because they're the ones that were evaluating why the cost overruns were occurring. Info Technology pointed me to the City Council. City Council pointed to the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee pointed to the Mayor. And what did the Mayor's office point to? The CAO. Controller, the independent elected controller, didn't even have a seat at the table when a task force was formed to look at what the problems were. So anyone that suggests that we don't have a problem with the fiscal structure of the city, I think has not experienced those types of problems. The other part of the structure that we didn't talk about much tonight, but it's every bit as important, is the fact that the city clerk is assigned the task under our current charter of collecting revenue. And just talk to anyone in the city, including the city clerk's office themselves, they don't even want that responsibility. And that's why we're not collecting the rightful revenue that we should be collecting, that is depriving the taxpayers of the city the services at the level that they should. We should be collecting, whether you agree or not, with the tax business tax and other revenues that the city council has adopted, if you're going to have them, you got to collect the revenue. And the city clerk shouldn't be collecting the revenue. And that's part of that structure that would be changed under either of the two committee proposals that are before us.
Paula? Thank you, Mr. Chair, and here I go again. One, I want to thank you, Nick. I've just had Nick's assurance that he is going to look at the community report that was made tonight. Again, let me remind our colleagues that people working on this report tonight are from all walks of life in this district. Very bright, most of them college, university graduates, Mr. Pacheco, not all, but I do want to remind us that we have lots of millionaires in this country without university degrees. And just from a comment made, and I didn't want anyone insulted out there, so talking about the treasurer of Orange County. I think it's imperative that we do take a look at what the community gives us. That's why I'm glad we're not voting tonight. There's no sense of our having feedback from the community if we're going to say, that's nice, thank you for taking your time, but it's irrelevant because we are smarter and wiser and no better than you, and we're going to go on our way doing what we were thinking about in the first place. As we go on to the other districts, I would hope that we would keep that in mind, colleagues, that any input given to us, they are the stakeholders. We are just their voices. They are the people that we keep talking about empowerment, that we want to empower, is the people that will address us and bring us their information. And I think it's vital that we take it, we digest it, we look at it, and take them seriously. And then on the next issue, there's just one more subject that I would like to discuss that I think is vital that we look at in the budget. I haven't got a clue and can't get this city to tell me how much it's costing us every time we grant another CRA development downtown Los Angeles, and how much we're financing of the fat cats downtown LA so that our taxes keep going up, business taxes, loss of jobs keeps increasing, and yet they keep getting benefits. I'd like to know those numbers, and I'd like to know if there's a way in this budget that we can put an end to it. And I'm suggesting, as was suggested in this report, that it be done by a vote of the people. Thank you.
Thank you. There's one request for public comment, and if I could ask that the commissioners all stay after this one public comment. We have about 5 more minutes of business we need to do before we leave. Siddle Rothstein has made a request for public comment.
I would like to remind all of the elected commissioners that Orange County had a wonderful bond rating before they were bankrupt. So much for don't fix it if it ain't broke. Also, as was pointed out, their treasurer was elected. That's the first thing I'd like to point out to you. The second thing I'd like to point out to you is that we citizens of this district were invited here to tell you what we thought. This is our city, this is our charter. We are just as important as the people from downtown who are allowed all kinds of time to speak to you, and now you have an empty audience to speak to. And whatever decisions that you have decided to make, you are making amongst yourselves because you have not heard from the citizens who turned out to let you know what they thought. Thank you all very much, which is another reason for secession from the city.
Item 7 of the agenda on reports of the committees. A couple of initial things.